If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 2, New Life, New Beginnings. I woke up in instant pain. The feeling was as if I was burning in molten lava. From the tips of my toes to my brain, the excruciating pain coursed through me. It lasted for only a few minutes, but it might as well have been hours. Once the pain started to wash away, I was able to finally take in my first breath. The air was cold, and sent a chill through me, but that hardly registered with my mind as I lay there panting. Slowly my breathing and heartbeat slowed to normal. And finally, I opened my eyes. That's not right, I thought to myself. At that moment I was staring at the branches of green trees swaying above me. Turning my head to look around, I realized that I was currently lying in a forest. I closed my eyes and tried to remember last night. I stayed home, because there was a big snowstorm, and I couldn't leave my home, so I was watching some random movies to pass the time, and that's it, then just blank. I slowly sat up only to find out that I was also completely nude. It took me a moment, but my brain finally registered a very important fact. My member looked different, bigger. Looking at the rest of myself, I realized that all of myself was different. I was about 6 foot, and had what some would call the dad bod, from the years of being single, takeout, and having no shits to give. But now I was probably 6'3" and had a body that would put most men to shame. Not some swimmer's build, but also not one of those protein brothers. I was a good mix of both, a lean buff I guess, but I didn't care, I was too confused and excited to care. That's when I saw that I also had long white hair that reached my waist, but at the moment was smeared with dirt and mud. I also had pale white skin, that was as smooth as anything I had ever touched. I couldn't stop myself from looking at the rest of my new body. From the tips of my toes to my fingernails, all of it drew my attention. Damn, I said absent-mindedly, as I looked myself over. After a few minutes too many of checking myself out, I looked around again. I needed to find out what was going on. Because all around me was nothing but thick forest, and I was anything but a wilderness survival expert. Looking around, I saw that on the ground by my feet, was a woven sack. Leaning down to look inside, I found a pair of sandals and a grey tunic that went to my thighs, with a black piece of rope that I could use as a belt. At the bottom of the bag, was a piece of paper, that had writing on it. Picking up the paper, I looked it over. From the look of it, it was a typed message, that was printed off, and placed in the bag, but on the piece of paper, was only a few words. Once done getting dressed, say the word system out loud. Gib. My brain came to a halt. I've read books like this where some random guy gets transmigrated or summoned to some world to fight some great foe. For the love of all that is good, please don't let me be some summoned person. I could never get into anime, so I wouldn't know the first thing about it. I thought, with a pang of panic. God, I hope I didn't just get summoned by this world for that crap. I prayed one last time, before conjuring the courage needed. Getting dressed quickly, looked around once more, to make sure I was truly alone. Not seeing anyone, I breathed in a lungful of air, and slowly let it out. Then using my voice for the first time, I said out loud. System. To my amazement, a neon blue screen appeared in front of me. Year 4000 BC. Time in the world 15 minutes 37 seconds. Name Adam Anthony Gray. Current age 18, immortal. Height 6'3". Note. Dear Mr. Gray, it is our deepest apologies for this inconvenience. Unfortunately, you died, when a quantum void we were testing lost control, and accidentally swallowed you into it. The good news is, that we were able to retrieve you from the void. The bad news is, well, you were swallowed into a void of nothingness. Well, it's more than that, but your monkey brain couldn't comprehend anything about it, so I won't waste my precious time trying to. As an apology, we have decided to give you a new life because of our mistake. The only thing that this system can do is track your current age, a world map, that tells you where you are, and the time. It will also show you areas with human inhabitants, which will be marked in blue. The darker the color, the bigger the population. It's not like those systems, that are in your world's books. It won't give you abilities, or rewards, it's practically worthless, but hey, you're alive, so be happy with that. As a bonus, we added Spotify to your system, which is connected to your old world for some entertainment. Now, to the good stuff. I'm sure you are currently wondering where, and when you are. Well, at the moment of your death, you were watching a movie named Twilight. So we decided to send you to that world, through one of our multiverse portals. The only problem is, when we were able to send you there. The latest we managed to send you is the year 4000 BC. That is also the reason we gave you immortality, so you could be a part of the story. We had to grow you a new body entirely, because let's just say, your last one, was pretty much, how do you humans say it, fucked up. So we moved your conscience, into this new body, which we created just for you. In my opinion, it was wasted on you, but what the higher UPS want, they get. Your new body, has an increased healing ability, along with a regenerative ability. If you lose an arm, it will grow back, get your head chopped off, well get ready monkey boy, because your head is about to sprout legs and start growing. As long as there's still a speck of dust left of you, you will start to regrow, back to a perfectly fine human. To help you survive in this new world, full of sparkling danger, we gave you some upgrades, that should help you out. We gave you increased speed and strength, making you as strong and fast if not more so than most vampires in your new world. We also added some emotional dampeners, which will help you with living forever. Because the last thing we need is for you to go nuts and kill everyone on the planet, as well as to keep you from wanting to jump in a volcano, and waste the effort we put into making you. All the dampeners do, is make it easier to process grief or anger. It won't take it away, you will still feel the emotions, just less of it. Along with increased intelligence. You're welcome for that one, because let's be honest, you seem to have been lacking in that department. Director of Science Gib. The Multiversal Republic. P.S. Good luck. You're gonna need it. I was slack-jawed. Wait, this can't be right, I said in a panic. My heart was starting to race in my chest. No more TV, or fast food, what the fuck? And did I just get called a monkey? I had to pause at that. Was my life really that shitty? Where I thought of fast food and TV, before my own mother, father, and sister. Maybe this isn't a bad thing. I thought, once I got myself under control. My life was a complete waste. I dropped out of college, to work a 9 to 5, all because I was too lazy to show up for classes, not a girlfriend anywhere in near or future sight. And plus, I've watched Twilight almost a million times. It was my sister's favorite movie when we were younger. So I knew the story, better than most movies. After a few minutes, of rereading the message, I got my thoughts under control. I needed to find out where I currently am. System map, I said out loud. Just like before, the blue screen appeared in front of me, but unlike before, on the screen, it showed the entire planet. Using my hands, I was able to move the globe, and zoom in and out, like Google Earth. It only took a second, for me to see where the larger populations were, like Egypt or many small places across Europe. But my current location, was around the middle of what will become Germany. So without thinking twice, I started moving south, in the direction of the biggest population, which was in Egypt, or what will be Egypt, in about a few thousand years. It took me a whole year to travel to Egypt, or more correctly their predecessors. Currently, it wasn't a kingdom, it's a bunch of villages along the Nile River, that would one day group up into one big city. And all I have to say about the trip was, fuck this shit. The first week, of the trip, it rained non-stop, not just a drizzle, nope, it was a full-on storm. Thankfully, when the rain finally stopped, it wasn't so bad. My new body, had incredible endurance, which allowed me to walk from sun up to sundown, without a sweat. I also learned how to hunt and track animals with my new abilities, it was incredibly easy. With my speed, I could run circles around any animal, and with my strength, break their necks like twigs, making it as painless as possible. The cooking part was the hardest. First I had to use a stick and a piece of wood to start a fire. Then I had nothing to cut my kills with. So I would use my strength, to rip open the animal, and put the meat on a stick, like a kebab. But with all the bad came a lot of good. Every night I would lie down by my fire, and watch the stars above me. There were thousands of them in the sky, unlike before I came here, you would be lucky to see a handful. It allowed me to think about my new life, as well as think about my life before I came here. I wondered, if my family was okay. I felt bad. To them, I probably just simply disappeared, never to be seen again. It was strange how I felt about it. I felt sad, but I also didn't. Like I was unattached to the feeling, and was looking at it from the outside looking in. About 4 months in I learned how to tan animal skins. My starting clothes were good, but they didn't last long. Constantly getting caught on trees or bushes and tearing the fabric. So, instead of murdering my clothes, I decided to give tanning a try. It started when I caught a good-sized buck with massive antlers. I remember watching a documentary about primitive living, and how bone was a very versatile tool, used for medicine to a large variety of objects. So, I found a flat rock, and started sharpening one end of an antler. With my strength, I needed to be careful not to break it. So for 3 days, I sharpened an antler. Once done sharpening the antler, I put it to the test. It only took 30 minutes, to find a lone deer. As soon as I caught sight of it, I moved on autopilot. In under a second, I ran to the side of the deer, grabbing it by the head and twisting sharply, nearly tearing its head off. The deer dropped, not even knowing it died. Kneeling, I used the antler knife to stab into the deer's side. It wasn't as sharp as a steel knife, but it did the job. Once the insides of the deer was outside, I carried the carcass back to my camp. Once there, I started the long process of learning to skin the deer. I must thank my unhealthy habit of watching random things on the internet, or I would have never figured it out. The first thing you do when you have the hide, is remove any flesh, or excess meat from the hide. Next, you soak the hide in water for a day, to remove any blood, dirt, or anything on the hide. Now that the hide had been soaking, I was able to scrape away any excess tissue that remained. Now it was time to dry, and stretch it. To do that, I stretched it out, and stabbed the corners into a tree, with sharp pieces of wood, I had managed to make with my dull antler knife. After waiting a few days, the hide was finally done. In the end, I managed to make a pair of shorts. Yup, shorts. I used my already ripped tunic, for thread, to tie it together, into what I would describe as, the hobo look. Because they were anything but pretty, but hey, I hadn't seen another living soul, in nearly 5 months. So now, I only had shorts with sandals. Thankfully, it seems that I can't get sunburnt anymore, so, that's good, I guess. Chapter 2, Edited. The first 1,000 years. I never made it to my original destination. I didn't even make it halfway through Ukraine before a large nomadic tribe found me, or they found me and tried to kill me. Something about demon spirit or something. I wasn't listening to them because I was too busy dodging their spears. After they ran out of things to throw at me, I was finally able to speak to them. I knew that if I wanted to, I could have killed them all in a matter of seconds. With my speed and strength, it would have been like stepping on ants. But I haven't lost my morality just yet. And they were more than likely just afraid of me. A strange-looking man with white hair and pale skin shows up out of nowhere. I would have done the same if I was in their sandals. I tried to speak with them, but English isn't a language yet. Thankfully, an older man came from the back of the group and approached me. He was probably in his late 30s, but compared to the rest of the group he was the oldest, the others were in their teens to early 20s. He stopped about 15 feet in front of me and I was able to get a better look at him. The man was only around 5'7" with long dark brown hair. Tan skin and a bone necklace around his neck. It turned out he was the leader of the group. His name was Yonata. It took me around a week to become semi-fluent in their language. Thanks to my new intelligence. The tribe was around 120 in total. Only around 40 of them were men able to fight. The rest were the old, women, and children. They were a nomadic tribe, always moving from northern Ukraine in the summer, then they moved south during winter. The reason they tried to kill me was that they had never seen someone like me before, as in someone so pale and with white hair. Everyone in the tribe had darker hair from brown to black. They also had tan skin and not pale skin like me. It made me a curiosity of the tribe's people. But after a few days of me hunting and bringing back 2 or 3 deers or boars a day, I had guys wanting me to marry their daughters. But I passed on that. But other than that, everything was great and I became a hunter and tanner of the Shoma tribe. My skill in both gave me a good amount of respect among the tribe. Every now and then we would come into contact with smaller tribes, some friendly and wanting to trade, others looking to fight and kill all the men and take the women. But with the size of our tribe, they just tried to avoid us. So for the next 10 years, I stayed with the tribe. But eventually, life started to get boring in the tribe. It was a routine that never changed, north during the summer and south during winter. Always the same trees and mountains to look at, never anything new. So I finally decided to leave before people started to wonder why I don't age and start thinking of me as a god or something. As I left I traded the leader of the village 15 pelts for a donkey that I named Berry. And off we went, me and my donkey, from tribe to tribe and village to village. I traveled learning new languages and experiencing new cultures. Most tribes were friendly and curious about my looks, but some were hostile and wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't mind. Any time a tribe was hostile I would simply walk away. As I traveled I would constantly collect animal hides from my kills and tan them while I traveled. With these pelts, I would trade for other items, sometimes for different pelts or in bulk for an ox, horse, or another donkey. And before I knew it I had around 4 donkeys, 6 horses, and an ox I named Eddie. Eddie normally pulled a small cart I made for my heavier items, like some sparkling fool's gold rocks I found in a river and my tools. The horses carried my pelts in sacks on their sides. Barry and his new donkey friends would carry my smaller items, like any carvings I made or herbs I found. Eventually, I made my way to Africa. But unfortunately, that was a very bad idea. And I mean bad. Because I was the first white person that an African tribe had ever seen, and they thought of me as an evil spirit coming to consume their souls. So they would try to kill me or ward me off with chance. And any time I was seen by a tribe they would try to kill me. So me and my animals decided to head back north. And just like this, time passed with more tribes and villages I would trade with. Time just seemed to slip by. It really amazed me when I would check my system and see that years passed when it only felt like a few months. And at some point, I just stopped looking at my system and just started enjoying life and the incredible places I could find myself at. One of my favorites is Mount Everest. Seeing it in the distance so high and mighty sent shivers down my spine at the sight. I haven't climbed it yet, but I will. It's only a matter of time. And I have unlimited time. Every now and then people would join me on my travels, but would slowly wither away and die while I stayed forever young. For a long time, it was hard to watch as it happened. But after Barry and Eddie passed I just became numb to the loss and just started seeing it as a natural cycle of life. We live then we die. Except me and the soon-to-be vampires. And for 600 years I traveled and traded. From what will become France all the way to China or to India. Letting the days and years slip by like water through open fingers. I learned every language I could, storing it away deep into the archive of my mind. Every now and then I would have to fight off some wolves or small parties of men wanting to kill me and take my goods. Anytime the wolves came I gained new pelts. Anytime men came for my goods, then the wildlife would eat good off of their bones. But no matter how many lives I have taken over the years I never became completely cold-blooded about it. Most of the time when I needed to kill they never knew what killed them or that they even died at all. Snapping their necks was the easiest and quickest way to end them. I never held it against them. Most of the time they didn't have much of a choice, either they killed me and survived off of my goods for years or they starved to death. Most of the time I wouldn't even kill them and instead, I would let them join me. Of course, after giving them all a good beating. I would show some how to herd, and for others, I would teach a trade. Showing them how to carve wood. Or I would show the use of certain herbs and the best way to use them. Most of the time they would leave at a village putting their new skills to good use and starting new lives. While I always move on to the next destination. Chapter 4, Passing Time, Part 2. Host. Year 2480 BC. Time in the world 1520 years 7 months 14 days 9 hours. Name Adam Anthony Gray. Age 18. Immortal, 1538 years old. Height 6'3". Over the past few hundred years Egypt has started to grow. From the groups of small villages along the Nile River to a massive city. Giving me the perfect place to sell my goods. Over the years I downsized. I went from over 10 animals to 1 mule with a cart to carry my goods. It was a nice change of pace for me. While I traveled I learned all that I could, from primitive fighting styles to their culture. Keeping records of where I went and what I learned about their cultures. That was my main reason for traveling. Of course, the things I could trade for my pelts were nice sometimes, but at the same time, I didn't care about that right now. I just wanted to see the world and experience new things. See things that before I came here I could only dream of. I didn't have a place I needed to be and I was never in a hurry. I would get there when I got there. Every now and then I would stop somewhere for a few years just because I felt like it. And leave when I feel like it. It's strange knowing that you're immortal. Time just doesn't have a meaning anymore. And a year is a blink in my eyes. It's surprising how much some of these people are willing to spend on wolf or tiger hides. But as long as they are willing to spend, I'm willing to sell to them. Making me one of the more popular stalls in the market. Early on I learned that with my looks it would be impossible to sell to anyone in Egypt. Most people in these times are very superstitious. And any time they saw my hair and pale complexion, they would think I'm a spirit that possessed my body. So I took on a new look. And no, I didn't cut my hair or dye it a new color. Over the millennium, I've become too attached to it. So instead I always wore a head and face cover. Or better known as a keffiyeh. It was a long piece of fabric that I would wrap around my head and mouth, only letting my eyes show. And I covered the rest if my skin, not wanting them to see my pale skin. I tried to tan my skin, but with my healing ability it was impossible. Of course, I still got strange looks from it and my height didn't help, but I got less from when I didn't wear it. I sold animal pelts and small trinkets that I made on my travels. Today was like any other. I had a stand in a large market that I could buy out for a few weeks until I ran out of things to sell, then leave, letting someone else rent it out after me. It was late in the day, the sun was beginning to drop behind the horizon and it became twilight. I was just about to start packing my pelts when I caught sight of a group of people moving through the market. All of them were dressed in the finest clothes available at the time. And all of them had gold jewelry covering them from necklaces to earrings and rings. They didn't seem to walk but glided. And I instantly knew what they were. I hadn't seen any before, but it wasn't hard to tell what they were. The group were vampires. And just my luck, they were heading right for me. I stood and watched them move in my direction. Everyone gave them space to move, like they knew what they were and didn't want to even look in their direction. As if just by looking in their direction could get them killed. But I just stood there and watched them come even closer. Step by step. Finally, they were standing in front of my stall, all 9 of them, 8 men and 1 female. I recognized one of the men and the woman instantly. It was Amun and his mate Kabi. Just like they did in the movies. Only Amun and Kabi stepped forward to look at the pelts, the rest of the men, my guess, their guards turned outwards watching for any danger. They too were vampires with red eyes and cold expressions. And now I was face to face with my first vampires. Chapter 5, Passing Time, Part 3. Chapter 4, Edited. I would like to say that I wasn't nervous, but I was. I wasn't afraid of them. If things got bad I could try and outrun them. Hoping the shock of seeing me take off in a blur would give me a good head start on them. And if they caught up to me I would fight. But against 8 vampires there was only one possible outcome. Me being torn into a million pieces. I had dreamed of my first encounter with vampires. Anything from them trying to kill me or just seeing them from a distance. But now I had 2 vampires from the movies in front of me. And not just some random vampires. But Amun and Kabi. 2 of the oldest vampires in the Twilight movies. For a few moments, they went over the different pelts from wolf to tiger, lion, zebra, and many more. Kabi turned to Amun and in a soft voice said, "What do you think of them, my love?" Her voice was soft and soothing like pure honey. "I like them, especially this one," Amun said as he rubbed a Bengal tiger pelt. "How much for it?" Amun asked, not looking up. "I decided to leave a good impression on them, so I said, please take them as a gift." Now Amun looked up at me. Looking me right in the eyes. As if he was trying to look into my soul. Looking for any bad intentions that I might have. But over my 1,500 years of being a trader, I have developed a very impressive poker face. After a few moments, Amun started to smile. Showing off his perfect teeth and slightly longer canines. But not in a threatening way. "I like you," Amun said, not losing his smile. "What is your name?" he asked me, looking back to the tiger pelt. "Adam. Adam Gray," I replied. "Adam, strange name. Where are you from, Adam?" Amun asked. "Everywhere and nowhere," I said simply. "So you are a traveler?" Kabi asked. "I am. That is how I get my pelts," I said, pointing to some Bengal tiger pelts, then the wolf furs. "These animals only live in certain areas and are hard to kill, so they are hard to come by, and I have to travel sometimes for years just to find one. And you are just giving them to us?" "Why?" Kabi asked. Lifting my hands, I removed the cloth covering my face, making sure that they got a good look at me so they would remember me in the future. "It never hurts to make new friends," I said with a small smile. They seemed to be awestruck by my looks. My pale skin untanned by the sun and my sharp jawline giving me quite the attractive look. They seemed stunned by this and they both stared at me in wonderment. After a few seconds, they both snapped out of it and looked at each other. All the while I grabbed one of the tiger and wolf pelts, rolled them up, and tied a leather strap around the middle. Once I was done I set the rolled pelts in front of them. And here you are, I said, tying the cloth back over my face. Thank you very much, Kaba said, picking up the rolled pelts. Both of them were still looking at me with curiosity as they walked away whispering to each other. As they were leaving, one of the guards stared me down. And I knew that look. I have seen it more times than I would have liked over the years. It was a look of murder. And lust. Then it connected. He wanted my blood. So once they were out of sight, I began packing my furs like a madman possessed. Picking up whole stacks of furs and throwing them into one of my carts. Getting everything in only minutes. Once packed, I hauled ass out of Dodge. Looking over my shoulder for any signs that I was being followed. But there were too many people in the streets to tell. Finally making it a few miles out of the city, I looked around again. Nothing. The moon was thankfully full, giving me enough light to see a good distance. But nothing. Closing my eyes, I let out a sigh of relief. Regular people are easy to fight, but a vampire is as strong and as fast as me. Not that I would really know, I only met my first ones less than an hour ago. And I don't know the first thing about actually fighting. Of course, I have fought, but I have only fought regular people. That's like a bear against a deer. There isn't a fight, just a slaughter. As I opened my eyes again, I saw something in the distance and I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. It was him running right at me, or I think it is. All I could see from my current location was a small fast-moving sand cloud. Thinking fast, I dove into my cart, grabbing the first thing that could be a weapon for me. And what was that thing? A wooden mallet. Leaping out of the cart, I used my speed and ran to a small sand hill 100 feet from the cart. Once on the other side of the hill, I laid down in the sand, letting just my eyes peek over. It only took a handful of seconds for the man to appear by my cart. Being used to my sudden appearances around him, the donkey that was pulling the cart didn't react to the sudden appearance of the man, only silently blinking at him. The man didn't seem to like the fact that I wasn't with my cart and started searching for me. But me being me, I forgot it's impossible to not leave tracks in the sand. And well, he saw them. As soon as he saw them, I decided my best bet was to attack first. I zoomed right at him. It took the vampire by surprise to see me running at vampire speed right at him. He froze, but only for a moment before he too zoomed right at me. As I got into range, I swung my wooden mallet right for his head. But the vampire dodged my swing by leaning to the side just enough for the mallet to miss him. As soon as I missed, the vampire went on the attack. Swinging his fists right at me. To my amazement, I seemed to be faster than him. Not by much, but enough to give me an advantage, a small one, yes, but one all the same. I dodged his hand by going under. Grabbing the outstretched right arm while moving under. I jumped into the air, still holding his arm. Using my legs and hips, I managed a hard spin midair when I hit the zenith of my jump. I heard a loud crack and a crunch, then the man let out a terrible scream as I landed awkwardly, tumbling head over feet into the sand. Quickly standing back up, I looked at the man who was on a knee, looking at the stump that used to be his right arm. But now it was just a stump of crystal. Looking down, I realized I was still holding the arm. So without a second thought, I attacked. Swinging the arm at his head. The man jumped backwards, yelling, "What are you? Your heart still beats, but you have the same abilities as me," the man said in a gruff voice. "I'm just a man," I chuckled while swinging the arm around me like nunchucks. This only seemed to piss him off even more. Make him rush me. I was a little excited now. For a long time, I was nervous about fighting a real life and death battle against a vampire. But now, with it being so easy, I was getting cocky. My guess is I had better control over myself from the over 1,000 years of using my abilities. Because I might not know anything about fighting, but I could tell this guy used a lot of useless movements. Wasting nanoseconds on a pointless shift of a body part or shift in weight. And those nanoseconds that he wasted gave me the openings I needed to do some damage. He came in low for a one-arm tackle, but that just left his head open for attack. Using his own severed arm, I swing down, hitting him hard, shattering the arm into dust. And sending him face first into the sand. Wasting no time, I went for the kill. Blurring onto his back, I grabbed his head before he could regain any thoughts, and I pulled hard. Breaking his head off of his neck. Once I decapitated him, I fell backward, hitting the sand and looking up to the night sky. Slowly letting the adrenaline wash away. I need to learn how to control my abilities better. For too long I was naive to think I would never fight another vampire. And I got lucky to beat this vampire. Just using my better control over my ability to win. Yes, I won, but what would happen when I meet another vampire with just as much control and actual fighting experience? I'll tell you. I will be screwed with a capital S. So I decided to start a new branch in my life. Goodbye fur trader, hello martial arts. Chapter 6, Passing Time, Part 4. Chapter 5, Edited. Year 2048 BC. Time in world 1952 years 10 months 74 days 4 hours. For the next few hundred years I dedicated myself to learning and knowledge. Traveling to all corners of land I could reach. Learning new things and mastering them. I started with the most important thing. Learning different fighting styles, spears, swords, and hand-to-hand. I was best with the short sword. Making my own style where I got in close and would attack. Not giving my opponent the opportunity to fight back. In other words, coming in close and staying on the offense. Constantly keeping my opponent on the defense by constantly attacking. Or it should. I have yet to put it to the real test against a vampire. When I learned how to fight I couldn't practice against regular people at full speed. So instead I would watch people practicing. Storing it all away in my brain. Then go somewhere private and away from any populated places, mostly the woods, and practice. Studying it and learning from it. Feet placements, how to hold the weapon, and different moves and combos. Practicing it and mastering the moves, molding and improving them to better fit my speed and strength. Spending most of the years in China itself. China was packed full of different fighting styles. Especially with the sword, spear, and hand-to-hand. It was very impressive to see it. My guess is the constant wars fought in those times gave birth to hundreds of different styles. And every one of them I mastered. The only problem is the current weapons themselves. They are made of bronze. Bronze is a very weak metal compared to other metals like iron or steel, and iron swords won't be made for a while and steel won't be produced for over 1,000 years. The problem was, how can I find something strong enough for a vampire? With my strength, anytime I hit something like a rock that might be as strong as a vampire's skin with a sword made of bronze, it would break in half or into pieces. So I did the best I could by mentally fighting an imaginary foe. Over the years I fought millions of imaginary enemies. Sometimes multiple enemies all at once. So for about 300 years I just studied martial arts. After learning thousands of different styles I decided to start learning other things. The first thing after was medicine. It's honestly amazing what natural medicine can do. It can heal rashes, and mixing certain herbs with hot water can get rid of coughing or colds. Natural antibiotics. It really is fascinating. Then I just kept going, moving from one thing after another. Seeing Mount Everest in the Himalayas, the Nile River, the Swiss Alps, the Algarve coast in Portugal, and more in my traveling. Time skip. Year 1000 BC. Years in world 3000 years 8 months 44 days. I was currently sitting on a beach in the boot of Italy, watching the sun slowly drop behind the ocean as I went over the past 1,000 years. I learned to fight, medicine, and an insane amount of other things, from carving to building, cooking, languages, and all sorts of things. And I was still traveling to learn more things. But at the moment I was having a little vacation. As I was thinking, my mind began to wander. There was still one thing. One thing I had yet to do. Or even attempt. And that was to find love. Since I've come here thousands of years ago, I haven't felt the urge to find love. Of course, I've been with women, but only for one-night stands. I never got attached. Why get attached when they are destined to die in a blink of an eye for me? And the last thing I want right now is immortal children. It felt like I was waiting for them. Waiting to meet them, whoever they are. But who are they? I could only guess. Chapter 8, A Start to Something New. Chapter 6, Edited. Volterra. Volturi. Sitting in the audience chamber of the Volturi's main base. Aero, Caius, and Marcus were listening to a very interesting story from one of the vampires they had sent in search of new covens. And finally, he had returned after almost 100 years of traveling in search of more covens to add to the Volturi's numbers. But he didn't just return with information on different covens, but with a very intriguing story. I first heard of this man not long after I left in search of other covens. The tall vampire named Ancheli said as he kneeled in front of the 3 leaders. I started my journey by going north into the land of the savage tribesmen. In search of any information that might lead me to a coven. I also started hearing tales of a strange man that would come to their village every few decades and heal their sick or dying. At first I thought that it was a traveling healer. But the farther I traveled I still heard stories. Some villages say he has been coming to their village or tribe for hundreds of years and then would move on. At first I didn't believe them, thinking it was just a tale, but even some villages in the Far East have stories of this man saying the same thing, that he has been coming to their village for hundreds of years. Arrow sat on his throne and tapped his fingers on the armrest thinking. Turning to look at Marcus, Arrow asked. What do you think, brother? I think we should find this man. Who knows how old of a vampire he is and what abilities he may possess. Perhaps it is a healing ability that can be very useful when making deals with certain humans, bring them back from death's door, or one of their loved ones. Arrow smiled and let out a chuckle. Yes, brother, that would be a good idea. Once we have enough members with abilities we can use, we will be able to finally end the Romanian coven, then the other bothersome covens, and bring the vampire world under our rule. Kahud said in his pompous voice. Yes, once the Romanian coven is gone the Vulturi will be the ruling coven, Arrow said, turning back to the still kneeling Angeli. I want you and 2 others of your choosing to go and find this man and bring him back. As you command, Angeli said, standing and slowly backing out of the chamber. And if he doesn't wish to join? Caius asked, standing from his throne after Angeli left. Then we will use Charmian to make him, Arrow said with a smirk, leaning back in his throne. Charmian is a female vampire with the ability to influence emotional ties and can manipulate others. This is how Arrow was able to force those to join the Vulturi when they never wanted to. MC. I was currently traveling among tribes in Spain, or at the time known as the Iberians. Healing and doing a little trading. Instead of the over 10 animals I used to have. I only had a horse named Buttercup pulling a small cart now while I walked beside it. I was walking down a small path that led east. While walking I turned on my playlist of favorite songs and zoned out, knowing that my horse would stay on the path and would stop when confused on where to go. It was mid-afternoon when I stopped to have lunch under a tree just off the path that kept the sun out of my eyes. I'm so happy I made sunglasses, I said to my horse Buttercup. I have made glass thousands of times in the pursuit of making sunglasses. The only problem is I was shit at it. First, it was finding something hot enough to melt the materials for it. Then the shaping and darkening of the glass that took so long. But I was determined to make them. And now I have a few dozen in my wagon as backups. Over the years I've had many animal companions. It always hurt when they died, but death is unavoidable and just made me cherish the moment that I had with them even more. Pulling out a sack of smoked meat and flatbread from the cart I set it down, then untied Buttercup and let her graze while I ate. Food in this era sucks. It's bread, porridge, vegetable or chicken stew, fish, and cheese, and different kinds of preserved meat. Yes, those are all good foods, but they're so bland. Every now and then I will go to India or other places and find places that have certain spices that I can buy, but they only last so long. I would buy spices by the pound. But I tended to be heavy-handed when it came to them and run out within a year. Making a smoked meat sandwich. 2 flat pieces of bread with smoked meat in the middle, I took a bite and chewed hard. The dried bread and smoked meat took a lot of chewing just to get down, but I do with what I have. Taking out my water skin I took a deep swig to help the bite go down without choking on it. As I'm taking the swig I hear the sound of people running fast. Not like normal people, but like me when I run at full speed. Vampires, I whisper. Standing in a flash I look in the direction they are coming from. From the sound, it's 3, maybe 4. Not wasting a second I blur to the wagon, pulling out one of my bronze swords and getting ready to finally put my fighting skills to the test. Angeli. It's been 2 years since he was sent in search of the white-haired man. First, he went north looking for any village that had seen him recently. It took 7 months to find a village he had recently been in. So following his trail we figured out he was going southwest towards the Iberian people. As they passed through the villages something piqued Angeli's interest. Every time the white-haired man came to a village no one went missing from the villages, not even the poor people that nobody would miss. That's how Angeli could track covens. Look for a village or city where the poor tend to go missing and you find the coven close by. But never did a person vanish when the white-haired man was there. Making Angeli slightly suspicious. How is he surviving if not on human blood? Angeli thought as they continued their journey. It took them over a year to finally catch up with the white-haired man. It took them this long because they would need to stop and feed every time they found a village or city and would lose a day every time. Thankfully the white-haired man stayed a few days at every village or city, letting the vampires slowly catch up with him. Finally, they came to a village in the southern area of Iberian. Like usual they entered the village covering themselves in black and red cloaks, making sure not to let the sun touch their skin and let the villagers see them sparkle. It only took a few minutes to get the good news. The white-haired man just left the village. Once they got the direction that the white-haired man headed in, the three took off once out of sight. Blurring through the woods, following a path through the woods, the three of them could finally see an end to this long journey of tracking down this man. And finally bringing the hunt to an end. After running for 10 minutes they finally caught sight of a cart and a brown horse grazing not far from it. Then finally the white-haired man. Chapter 9, A Fight to Remember. MCPOV. Shit, I thought as I saw the three vampires stop 10 feet in front of me. It was clear to see who they were or what group they were from. The Vulturi, I mumble as we stare at each other. Over the past 1000 years the number of vampires I have seen has grown, starting in Romania where the current ruling coven is. The Romanian vampires didn't care if people knew what they were. Ruling the people with cold hearts and an iron grip. Massacring whole villages at a whim. In some of the worst times I would take large groups of villagers and guide them to newer lands. I figured the more remote the place the better, because vampires needed human blood to survive, to not be in pain from the lack of blood, so vampires wouldn't risk a long distance travel where it might take them a month just to reach them with no villages close by. Thankfully there are a number of places for that, and I would teach them how to survive in those places. Not leaving until I was sure they could survive on their own. After doing that a few times the Romanian coven got wind of what I had been doing and sent 70 vampires after me. The pompous vampires were a bunch of mentally challenged pricks. And only chased me for a few days before they got tired of it and went on a blood rampage through countless villages. Killing hundreds of men, women, and children just because they could, and to crush those with the hope of a new and better life that I might have brought them. While I watched them from a distance, unable to stop the pointless killing. Vowing that one day I will end the Romanian coven. And I knew just how to do that. The Vulturi. Yes, they aren't much better than the Romanians, but the Vulturi brought law to the vampire world. Stopping the massacres and open killings of humans. Hiding the vampire world from the human world. So I chose from two evils. One who killed hundreds for fun, or those who brought rules and order to this lawless world. Punishing those who broke those rules harshly. It wasn't a hard choice to make. The only problem was I didn't know when the Vulturi started their rise to power. But now I had what looked like 3 members of the Vulturi in front of me. It wasn't hard to figure out. They were in black and red cloaks, the signature appearance of the Vulturi. Or a cult, but if you think about it they might as well be the same. The 3 stopped about 15 feet in front of me, staring at me and my sword. A tall vampire with night black long hair and pale white sculpted features stood in front of the other 2, clearly the leader. I stood tense, ready for any sudden movement that might signal an attack. The leader of the group tilted his head to the side, looking confused. Turning to look at one of the men behind him, he said, "It's not him, this is just some human with white hair." Turning back to me with an evil smile he said, "We weren't able to have a meal in the village because of you, so now you are our meal." Without wasting a second they attacked, moving in a blur right at me. I'm not entirely sure what they were expecting me to do. Just stand there in fear or try to run, but I can tell you they weren't expecting what I did do. They came at me in an arrow formation, the leader in the front and the 2 lackeys on both sides behind him. So I blurred into motion, clearly shocking them for a moment, leaving a gap for me to attack. Blurring at the leader I jumped, managing a flying kick to his chest, sending him flying backwards and crashing through a large tree. Landing on my back I jumped to my feet and turned to the other 2. The other 2 were blurring at me, one from the front and the other from the side, trying to get me from both sides. Using my speed I run at the one in front of me. Finally trying my fighting style I get in close and use my bronze sword. But all my sword did was cut his clothes without even scratching his skin. I might as well be trying to cut a rock, I thought. So I did the next best thing. Moving faster than any normal vampire could, I shoved the sword through the bottom of his head, dropping him and my sword to the dirt. Whirling around I grabbed the other vampire's outstretched hand that was about to grab me and twist it sideways. Holding the hand I raise my leg and kick him hard in the neck. In one fluid movement ripping the hand off and decapitating him. Before the body even hit the ground I heard the sound of running feet behind me. I turned and instantly jumped sideways to dodge my own sword that was now in the hands of the vampire leader. He continued to push. Slashing and stabbing, getting angrier and angrier the more I dodged or sidestepped his attacks. "What are you?" the man bellowed. But I didn't answer him. I was too busy waiting for an opening. And there it was. It was clear that he didn't know how to fight with a sword. Relying on his strength and speed he just swung the sword in hopes of hitting me. But that only made my job easier. The vampire leader went for a downward slash, allowing me to sidestep and enter his guard. Acting fast, I wrapped my arms around him in a bear hug and did something I would tell stories about for the rest of my life. With all my strength I shot my knee right between the vampire's legs. I could feel his dangly bits turn to crystal dust under my knee. The vampire leader let out a blood-curdling scream as his manhood was blown off by my knee. Letting go of him, he dropped to the ground, still screaming in pain. "Are you with the Vulture?" I asked the still screaming man. But he didn't answer. So I let him roll on the ground a little longer before I asked another question. "Why did they send you after me?" Finally, the man answered me with a stutter. They are looking for vampires with abilities to fight the Romanian coven." I let out a small smile. It's about time, I thought. "You know I would have let you all live if you wouldn't have attacked me," I said, and without giving him time to comprehend what I said, I stepped on his chest and pulled his head from his shoulders. "I plan to join the Vulture in ending the Romanian coven, nothing more. I won't become one of their pawns to use." Putting all the bodies together, I started a small fire. Using a piece of wood and setting their clothes on fire. Once done with it, I went back to my cart and pulled out a sack for the heads. Once done tying the sack and placing it into my cart, I went back to the tree and sat down. Picking my bread and meat sandwich back up, I sat there and started to think of plans for when I brought the heads back to the Vulture. Chapter 10, First Meeting. Year 994 BC. Years in World 3006. Photo of MC-. After finishing my sandwich, I reattached Buttercut to the cart and we continued our journey, leaving the smoldering bodies of the 3 Vulture members who attacked me behind. So me and Buttercup started our journey to Volterra, the city the Vulture got their name from and called home. While walking, I went over the fight in my head. First, the sword is completely worthless against a vampire. Bronze is just too weak to do any real damage. I needed to shove the sword through my opponent's head just to kill him. I guess I'll need to learn how to fight with a hammer just to do actual damage. At least until I can get my hands on a samurai sword. But other than that, there was no problem. I was a complete badass who just took on 3 vampires on my own and ripped them to pieces. Compared to the first time I fought a vampire in Egypt, I was completely different. I was faster, stronger, and I actually knew how to fight. I just hope that when I meet the Vulture they won't try to manipulate me. I know that when most people see me, all they see is a handsome young man. But under all of that is someone who has seen all there is to be seen. Learned every known language, and stuffed their brain with more knowledge than everyone on this planet combined. Seen more death and life than any breathing being. And that's my advantage. Letting others underestimate me, and when they do, that will be their fall. It took a little under 5 months to make it to Volterra. And to tell you the truth, I was a little surprised. It was a pretty good-sized village with a larger than normal population. I walked beside Buttercup through the packed streets full of people trying to sell things to passers-by. Bringing back memories of when I used to do the same thing. It wasn't hard to find where they were. There was a building much bigger than any other in the village with 2 people in the front wearing completely black cloaks shadowing their faces. And most people avoided looking in its direction. So leading Buttercup to the front of the building, I stopped her right in front of the 2 guards. Pulling a few mint leaves from a pouch on my waist and letting her eat them out of my hand. All the while the 2 guards were looking at me as if I was slow in the head. But I didn't give them any thought and went to the back of my cart, grabbed the bag of heads from the cart, walked to the guards, I said in a happy voice. "Delivery for the Vulture," I said, showing off my perfect teeth in a wide smile. Both guards were clearly confused, so I said. "Look, one of you go inside and tell Arrow that the white-haired man is here and he will understand," I said to the guards. It took less than a second for the guard on my left to go inside and tell his boss about the crazy man at the door. As we waited for the guard to come back, I stood there with the bag in my hand, tapping my foot and whistling a tune while waiting. Looking at the guard in front of me, I asked, "Nice weather we're having today." But he didn't say anything, just standing there trying to be intimidating, thinking his crimson red eyes would scare me. Instead, it made him look constipated. Before I could warn him about his eyes popping out, the door opened and the second guard stepped out. "Follow me," was all he said, then stepped back inside. Following him through the corridors, he led me to a large door. Pushing the door open, he stepped to the side and then motioned for me to go in. Once inside, the guard closed the door behind him. I could see the 3 leaders themselves. It took all my might not to start laughing at the sight. All 3 of them were sitting on raised stone thrones, acting intimidating. Forcing the laughter down, I moved forward. But once the 3 of them saw me, they got looks of confusion. Stepping in front of the three, I raised my right hand and did a small wave saying, "I heard that you were looking for me." Caius looked over at Arrow and said, "This can't be him. This is just a boy and a human at that. I can hear his heart." "That is true. Ever since Angeli left we have heard more rumors of this man from travelers who have passed through Volterra, telling tales of how this man saved their village from a great sickness. And if it was him, Angeli would be here," Marcusa said in his deep monotone voice. "Oh, that was his name," I said, bringing their attention back to me. "What do you mean?" Caius said in a voice that sounded like he was disgusted just by talking to me. Setting the bag on the ground and opening it, I grabbed the vampire leader's head and pulled it out. "Is this him?" I asked in a casual tone. The three of them froze, not saying a word. "No, maybe it's one of the others," I say, throwing the head over my shoulder and then pulling out the other two. "This one or this one," I say, lifting both heads. "It was the first one," Arrow said, finally speaking. "Oh, that guy. Yeah, we didn't really have a nice first meeting," I said, throwing the other two heads over my shoulders. I saw a small smile appear at the corners of Arrow's mouth. Standing up, Arrow approached me and stretched his hand out in a clear sign for a handshake. I knew what he was doing. He wanted to get a look inside the old noggin. I couldn't help but chuckle. There was no way I was going to let him touch me and read my mind. Arrow's powers allowed him to read every thought someone had ever had. And I didn't want him to know how I got to this world, so I just looked at his hand and then back up at him. "I'm not going to shake your hand," I said, putting my hands behind me. "Your friend Angeli told me all about the Volturi before I ripped his head off," I lied. Arrow frowned, but only for a second before going back to a small smile. "What are you?" Caius asked. "Just a very strong, long-lived human," I said with a shrug. As I said those words, I saw Arrow look behind me and nod, then I felt a strange feeling come over me. Turning to look behind me, I saw a young woman with brown hair and crimson-red eyes. Before I could think, my blue system screen appeared in front of me with a message. "Attempted system interference detected. System defense activated. Loading new system defense program. The system is loading, loading, complete. New system setting activated. Mind shield. Mind shield will protect the host's mind from any outside interference, such as mental intrusion, mind reading, mind manipulation, etc." After reading the system message, all I could say was, "Score." Chapter 11, Consequences. So Mind Shield is kind of like Bella's power. Except I can't project it to others. Before I could continue down my current path of thought, Arrow spoke. "Give me your hand," he said in a soft voice. Turning to face him, I saw his outstretched hand and smiling face. This little sack of shit just tried to force my will and make me his little puppet, I thought. I felt rage boil up inside me. I tried to push it down, but the more I pushed it down, the more it grew. Without thinking, I moved. Blurring in front of Arrow, I grabbed him by the neck, picking him up and off the floor, squeezing until cracks began to appear. The shock of what I just did was clear to see on his face. "Are you stupid?" I asked, moving my face close to Arrow's. Marcus and Caius stood from their thrones ready to attack me when I spoke. "Either of you or you," I say to Marcus and Caius, then turn to the lady behind me. "Move and I will crush his neck, then the rest of you." They froze, not wanting Arrow's death. "I came here to help you end the Romanian coven, not to become your puppet or join you," I say, squeezing Arrow's neck a little harder. "I do not appreciate you trying to force me to become one of you. I am much older than any of you by thousands of years. And I will not be forced or manipulated into your collection. And if you fuck with me, I will rip all of you apart," I say in a cold voice while looking right into Arrow's eyes. I could see the fear in his eyes and I knew I got the message across. Adding a little more flair to my performance, I threw Arrow right into his throne, breaking it into chunks. Turning to the female behind me, I say, still in a cold voice, "And if you try that again, I'll bury you alive to slowly go insane from a lack of blood." Looking back at the three leaders, I say, "I will return every few years, and when it's time I will fight with the Volturi to get rid of the Romanian coven. And if you even look in my direction the wrong way, I will end the Volturi before it even gets started." Of course, I was lying my ass off, hoping that they wouldn't push me and attack. But thankfully they just stood frozen. I knew when they got stronger they would more than likely want revenge, but when that happens I will be ready. Once standing, Arrow looked at me and dusted the rock dust from his clothes. Still, with a nervous look, Arrow said, Very well. I turned around to walk out of the massive doors when Arrow spoke. What is your name? Turning to him I said. Adam, then walked out of the room without looking back. Vulture POV. Once Adam was gone, Caius turned to Arrow and said. How was that possible? I could hear his beating heart. He's just a human but has abilities that can kill a vampire. I don't know. When he grabbed my neck I wasn't able to get any information from him. And Chelsea wasn't able to affect his loyalties and bring him to the Vulture. He must have shielding abilities, Marcus said while looking down at the destroyed throne. What will we do about this Arrow? Caius asked, sitting back down in his throne. We will wait and play nice. And once the time is right he can either join us or we will crush him under our might. Good, Caius said with an evil smile, leaning back into his throne. For the next few hundred years I traveled watching the world grow. Every few years I would check in with the Vulture but they were still looking for vampires with strong abilities before starting the war with the Romanians. So while they did that I went back to China and continued my studies of martial arts. In the past few hundred years China has grown exponentially in population leading to more and bigger wars and as a byproduct more fighting styles. As I was traveling through China I passed a small blacksmith hut. Realizing that I had yet to learn smithing, I bought it from the old man who owned it before me. I paid him extra to teach me for a few years before he left to retire. I was so caught up in learning fighting styles and other things over the years I completely looked right over something that could help me make a weapon for when I fought the Romanian coven. I ended up making something akin to a godly weapon in my eyes. Taking me over 300 freaking years to make. Of course, I didn't just make a sword for 300 years straight, I took breaks and did other swords or weapons, learning new things as I built them and taking what I learned to help me make my sword. I also traveled back west every few decades to see if the Vulture were ready yet, but of course, they were either too busy with political issues or still looking for vampires with special abilities. The sword I made was medium-sized and had the look of the Roman gladius. The only difference is it was thicker than a regular blade. I folded the metal over 40 times, giving me millions of layers of metal in the sword. It gave the blade a Damascus look and was as hard as titanium. A katana blade is only folded 10 to 20 times, making them incredibly hard and durable. And I just doubled it using my insane strength to hammer and mold the blade. I had to restart hundreds of times, but that's blacksmithing for you, one mistake and you could ruin it. I also went through a few hundred hammers in the process. After making the blade I tested it by cutting whole trees down in one blow. And then finding out that boulders fared the same as the trees did. To say I was excited would be an understatement. Finally, I have a blade that can do some damage to vampires. Once done testing my blade on trees and big rocks I decided to put it to the real test. Against a vampire. So I headed west to Romania. Year 440 BC. Once in the lands of the Romanian coven, it wasn't hard to find a vampire. They walked in the open letting people see them sparkle. Unafraid that anything can kill or wound them. In a small village just inside their lands, I saw a shorter male vampire with short black hair and bright crimson eyes. His skin sparkled in the sun for all to see. I wore a brown cloak covering my head with the hood looking like a monk. The long cloak also hid my already drawn sword, allowing me to get right up next to him and attack. Acting fast I swung the sword. With a loud boom, my sword hit his neck. Sparks flew as my blade chopped into the vampire. The vampire never even knew that he died. All this happened in less than a second. Most people in the street didn't even see me cut his head off. All they saw was the vampire's head fall off. Now that I had a usable weapon against vampires, all I could do now was wait. So too did. Building a small house in what will become Spain, I started farming. Growing crops and having a few cows for meat. I lived a normal life for a while. And just relaxed thinking of what will happen when the main characters start to appear. Chapter 12, Rome. Year 400 BC. Years in world 3,600 years 4 months 16 days. Name Adam Anthony Gray. Age 18 Immortal, 3,618 years old. Height 6'3". System abilities Mind Shield. Once I got my fill of the peaceful life I decided to head to Rome. Over the past few hundred years Rome has started to conquer lands in what will become Italy and grow. Knowing how powerful Rome will become I decided to start making some serious money. So after packing my belongings onto a cart I headed south to Rome. The closer I got to Rome, the more I saw the flourishing lands full of farmers and crops. Once the city came into view, I was amazed. The temples to the gods and just the number of buildings was incredible to see. Once I got to the more populated part of the city, I couldn't stop myself from looking in all directions, taking in the happy atmosphere of the citizens. As I traveled to Rome, I came up with an idea of how to make a living in Rome. Of course, I had a boatload of gold in my cart, but that won't last me forever, so I decided to become a blacksmith. It took a few days to find a blacksmith willing to sell me the shop and tools. But he was only willing to sell at an insane price. But I would make it back in time. And I had a lot of that. The shop was in a good market district and had a lot of foot traffic. So I wasn't too upset about the loss of gold. Once I owned the shop, I began to build tools or weapons for sale, pumping them out at an incredible speed. Business was slow for the first few years, only doing farm tools for farmers or tools for craftsmen. But finally, I had a soldier enter my shop looking to see if I could fix his heavily dented sword. The sword looked like it was used in battle, so I asked. "Seen some fighting?" I asked, picking the blade up from his hand. "Yes, the northern Gauls are pushing south. My patrol found a group of them far into our borders. My guess is they are going to attack soon, so I wanted to get my sword fixed before that happens, just in case," the soldier said, scratching his head tiredly. "Well, we can't have one of Rome's soldiers entering battle with a sword like this," I say, looking at the heavily dented sword. "How long until you can fix it?" he asked me. "I can have it done by early afternoon," I say to him. "But that's only a few hours. Most smiths take days," the soldier asked in a confused but happy voice. "Yes, most smiths would take that long, but I'm not them," I say, giving the soldier a smile. "How much will it cost me?" the soldier asked. "I will do it for 7 bronze. The soldier only got more confused. "But the rest of the smiths do it for 10 or more bronze. Like I told you, I am not like the rest of the smiths. Of course, I wasn't doing this to go broke. I was doing this so he would go and tell his military friends that there's a smith that does good, fast work for a lower price. Fixing his sword would only take me an hour at most. For most smiths, it would take multiple hours, so they charged more for the time it would take to fix their blades and the material needed to do so. Once his buddies come, I will charge them 8 or 9 bronze for things that will take me an hour, making me a good profit for an hour of work. And it worked. Before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle. I ended up hiring people to work the front of my shop while I hammered away in the back. But even then I was getting flooded. So I took on some apprentices, teaching them how to forge. Of course they couldn't get as much done as me, but they did get very skilled. The good thing about all that was I was making some serious money, allowing me to buy some more shops, and sending those smiths to my shops, with me only taking a 10% cut of their sales. Within 30 years I had over 10 smith shops. Unfortunately, Rome was taken over by the Gauls for 7 months. They massacred many innocent people and stole anything that wasn't attached. While Rome burned for the first time, I used my main shop to hide civilians, my smiths, and their families, while I killed any Gaul soldier that tried to enter. Only when I had killed more than 100 soldiers with ease did they finally leave me be. Once the Gauls were defeated and left, did Rome began to rebuild, and so did I. Most of my shops were still intact but had been looted for any weapons or tools that were inside. But I could buy and rebuild, because what else could I do? After a few months, business began to pick up explosively, due to the fact that my smiths and I were some of the only living smiths in Rome. All the others either died or fled and haven't returned yet, leaving a vacuum for weapons or tools that I was more than happy to fill. In just a few years things were back to normal. And once again I was making more money than I knew what to do with, so I started buying more stuff. Because the best way to make more money is to buy things that can make you more money, it's simple math. So I started buying potteries. These places made all sorts of stuff, from bowls, cups, plates, or decorative pieces for the rich. My biggest seller was roof tiles and chouses. Then I started to buy land. A lot of land. Of course, I had to bribe a lot of officials to do that. But as long as they got paid enough, they had no problem doing what I asked them to do. Once I got the land, I would buy slaves and set them free, paying them to work my land. I also built them homes to live in. Happy workers, happy life, and harder workers to bring in more money. Most of my land was for regular crops, but I also paid people to start a large wine vineyard. All this happened over 100 years. Around the 40-year mark, I started to employ people to do things for me so I wouldn't have to show my face and make people curious as to why I don't age. The last thing I need is for people to think I'm a god or something. Over those 100 years I made a deal with the Roman Senate to make me the sole supplier of the weapons and armor for the Roman military. Spending a large chunk of money to bribe members with a lot of sway to do that. I made the first makeshift factories to do this. I constructed a massive foundry. And I mean massive. I had over 1,000 workers all in one massive building. At one end is where the ore would come in and be melted down into bars. Once the bars were done, it would move to the smiths. The smiths were separated into different groups. One group did the sword, another did spearheads, then one did the armor. The smiths that made the weapons would make them while having apprentices, giving me more smiths to add to my employ once they know how to forge, allowing me to grow even bigger. Once done with the swords, they would go to the sharpeners who would use files or grindstones to sharpen the swords or spearheads. The sheaths for the swords were made by others and I bought the sheaths from them in bulk for the swords. They would every now and then try to get me to pay out the nose for the sheaths because they knew I was making massive amounts of money. But every time they would do that, all I had to do was go to my good friends in the Senate and tell them their army wouldn't have sheaths for their swords because the sheath makers were charging me an arm and a leg for a sheath, making me lose money that I could be using to give them donations. It's incredible to see what lengths the officials will go to just for money. One of the sheath makers that screwed with me was arrested for violating the law because he was interfering with the Roman military, stopping them from getting their weapons. After a few times of that happening, no one was willing to rip me off. After it became law that all men must join the Roman military, I had a constant flow of money. Even though I had to pay my workers above average pay, I was still making insane amounts of money. Over the next few hundred years I became the richest man in Rome. I bought a number of quarries where Rome would get their stone for the aqueducts, or their massive colosseums, or homes, making me all the richer. But still, every few years I would head north to check on the Volturi. Surprisingly, they had begun to find vampires with abilities. Nothing incredible, just some with strength-based abilities, but still that was a start. I knew that Jane and her brother were the ones that gave the Volturi the advantage when they fought the Romanians, and they wouldn't be turned until the 900s AD, so that gave me a time period of when the Volturi would attack the Romanians. And finally, end their rule. Chapter 13, Too Much Gold and a New Holiday. Year 114 BC. Years in World 3,886. With Rome constantly in a state of war, either conquering someone or being attacked by someone, I was making mountains of money, and I mean literal small mountains. The funny thing is, when the Roman government ran out of money, they came to me for money to buy more of my weapons for war. So of course I said yes, but with a 15% interest on the money. In other words, I gave them millions of gold and made millions of gold just by letting them pay me my own gold. The thing about back then was there wasn't a set amount of currency in circulation in Rome. No, it was all a matter of how fast they could make the coins. With my gold, I started another venture. Horses. I bought hundreds of horses, along with land for them. Then the horse breeders and the people to take care of the horses. Within a decade I had horses ready for the military. And of course, the Roman government needed my gold to pay me for my own herds. With interest on it, of course. I was getting more gold than I knew how to spend. I was practically Rome's piggy bank. Except every time they took money out, they had to put it back with a little extra. But hey, I'm not complaining. The only problem was, where can I keep all of it? At the moment it was all in my home, filling the rooms of my villa to the ceiling. It was cool at first to walk by rooms full of gold, but I was running out of rooms. So I decided to make a bank. And so I did. I made it underground, with massive walls surrounding the entice with a big metal gate to keep people out. I made it about 100 feet underground with stone walls and massive iron doors that were made in my foundry. I had different size rooms for use. Some of them were as big as 50 feet across, and some of them were as small as broom closets, for people who just wanted something small. We had small lock boxes. So I turned the place to keep my gold into a way to make more, by people paying me to keep their money safe. And it was safe, because almost every Roman senator and high-ranking official stored their it in my vaults. With that, I was able to get the military to guard my vaults for free. Of course, I wouldn't trust them completely, so I hired my own guards. I picked them myself to work the inside and the military to stand outside and be intimidating. It had around-the-clock guards, and we always kept records of how much gold you had and took out. It was a huge hit with the rich. Every rich person with 2 gold coins to rub together was scrambling to put it in my vaults, making me all the richer. After that, I started looking outwards to other countries. And had a great idea. I bought 11 ships and started importing and exporting goods from Rome to other countries and bringing spices and dyes to Rome. In a couple of years, I bought out my competitors, making me the only person that imported and exported goods to Rome and having over 100 ships to transport the goods. After that, I decided to stop. I was making too much gold. With all my businesses in Rome constantly using my gold to pay me, I was about to explode with gold. At my peak, I had a little under 1 billion gold coins. I remembered reading something that said Rome minted 20 billion coins over its rule. So I had a huge chunk of Rome money in my vaults. So I started a new tradition. Every year I would dress up in all red and put on a fake white beard. Sneak into people's homes leaving a gold coin in the open with a note that says "From Santa Claus." I used my speed to visit most of the city in one night. And let's just say it became a big deal. People thought it was from a new god. But hey, whatever rows their boats is fine with me. I was just trying to stop an economic crisis from happening by spreading the money around for people to spend. And generate some spending. So I started Christmas all to stop an economic collapse. Thankfully it seemed to work and I didn't need to give gold away anymore. And gave me an idea. Now that the economy is stable again, why stop it? So in the far north of Italy, I bought some land and hired a bunch of wood craftsmen to build toys. I would let the toys build up until once a year I would have all the toys delivered to some of my warehouses in Rome. At this point it was too big for me to do alone, so I paid helpers to help me deliver the gifts. But only to their doorsteps. Some people were upset that they didn't get gold anymore, but they got over it. After a few years, it came out that someone paid for all the toys to be delivered to the houses. But no one knew who it was and they never did. I was just happy they found out before they started building temples to the god Santa Claus. After a decade it became an actual holiday for giving gifts. And I didn't need to give the toys away anymore. Because they sold very well for the holiday of giving. Accidentally making me even more money. Chapter 14, A Companion. Year 165 AD. Years in World 4,165. I was currently on my way north on a small vacation. Leaving some of my most trusted men in charge. I planned to go north to the mountains and do some hunting and camping to clear my mind. It may not sound like fun, but when you have lived in a crowded city for hundreds of years you get tired of the constant bustle and noise. I was halfway to my planned camping grounds when I was passing by a village. It was a little after dark, so I decided to camp outside the village. Finding a flat area not far from the village, I dropped my pack, and started collecting wood, from the close-by trees. Making sure to grab dry wood, I quickly made a good-sized pile for the fire. Pulling some flint from my bag, I had a good-sized fire, cracking and popping in no time. Now with a burning fire, I grabbed some of my rations from my bag. Dried meat, and the few remaining vegetables I had packed for the journey. The dried meat was the average affair, of bland and tasteless, while the somewhat fresh vegetables, was a boost of my morale. Finishing my food, I pulled out a woven blanket made out of a rough material, and laid it on the ground, so I wouldn't be sleeping in the grass. By this time the sun had started to set, so I laid down on my back and looked up to the night sky, and the breathtaking beauty it showed. While I was watching the stars I heard a footstep behind me. Without thinking twice I jumped up and flipped over the fire, drawing my sword while flipping. Now that I was facing whoever was behind me I got a clear look at them. It was a young teen, maybe around 16 or 17, and instantly I was able to see his crimson eyes. The teen was frozen with eyes wide in shock of fear. As we stared at each other I looked him over. He was around 5'9" with short brown hair and sharp facial features. He wore fine clothes showing he came from wealth. How did you do that? The boy said hesitantly. Practice, I say jokingly. Before he could speak I spoke. What's your name? Julius, Julius Augustus Minucius, he replied. I slowly sheathed my sword. How long has it been since you turned? He looked at me confused. Turned? He asked. Yes, how long has it been since you were turned into a vampire? Van spur, Julius said, the word unfamiliar to him. Wait, have you had blood yet? Julius only stared at me. But I could see his eyes slowly move to my neck. I'm gonna guess no. It's actually very impressive that you, a newborn, didn't try to kill me or attack the village. I wanted to ask more questions, but I could tell he was fighting himself to not attack me, so I said. You need blood. No. Julius said in a loud voice. I will not become what killed my family. I will fight it. I put my hands up in a calming gesture. I guess some vampires attacked him and his family. So thinking fast I said. You can't fight it. But you don't need to kill people for blood. You can kill animals for their blood instead. If you don't, the pain in your throat will get worse. It won't quench the thirst completely, but it will help with the pain I'm sure you are feeling right now. Julius absent-mindedly lifted his hand and touched his throat. How do you know all of this? I chuckled and said, because I've been around some vampires before. I didn't want to drop the whole I am over 4,000 years old on him just yet. He was already confused and scared enough. Follow me, I said, pulling my cloak off. Then blurring into the woods. Julius didn't even register that I blurred away. His mind was too fogged up with the need for blood to care. Julius followed at a slower pace, still getting used to his newfound speed. It only took 5 minutes to find a large male deer lying on some grass in a small field deep within the woods. I stopped just inside the treeline and waited for Julius to catch up. Within a few seconds, Julius appeared a few feet from me, clearly not wanting to get close to me and lose his internal battle and attack me. I pointed at the deer and said, "Let your instincts take over." And before I could continue, Julius blurred towards the deer. In 3 seconds Julius traveled the 70 yards and tackled the deer. And instantly bit into its jugular. So for a few minutes, I waited as he slowly drank the deer dry. Once done, Julius let go of the deer's neck, letting the head thud onto the earth. He had blood running down his face and covering his hands. Julius slowly lifted his hands to look at them, blood-soaked. And from where I stood I heard him whisper, "What monster have I become?" I blurred to Julius's side, kneeling beside him and slowly putting a hand on his shoulder. "You are not a monster, Julius. Monsters are the ones that kill the innocent for no reason or for fun. You are still the same person, except now you are a little different is all." "A little? I am a monster that craves blood." "Julius, if you were a monster, then why didn't you attack the village and let yourself fall into the blinding thirst for blood?" He didn't say anything. "Instead you fought it. Or when you came to my camp you never attacked me. Even when the thirst was stabbing at you." Julius dropped his head down and began to cry. With chest-rattling sobs, he let his emotions out. I enveloped him in a hug, letting him grieve for his family, who is more than likely dead, and the fact that he has become the same thing that killed them. And now he was the young man filled with emotions. Scared and alone. After a few moments, Julius began to regain his composure, so I released him. "Come on, I will answer any questions you have." Standing, I walked to the dead deer. Picking up the back 2 legs in one hand, I began to pull it behind me with ease, while Julius followed. Chapter 16, Julius. I carried the deer back to my camp and started to carve the deer for some fresh food. All the while Julius stood a few feet away, silently watching. "Do you have questions, or do you just want to stand there and stare at me like a creep?" I asked, not looking up at him. "What is a vampire?" he asked. "Well, vampires are a pseudo-species of crystallized immortal beings who must feed on the blood of humans or animals to survive. It is impossible to not drink blood. The longer you go, the more you need it, until you lose all mental faculties and give in to the thirst and go on a blood rampage for anything that has blood. But mostly after humans." Looking up, I saw Julius standing there with furrowed brows. "So now I must drink blood to survive?" "Yes," I say, standing to my feet. "And unfortunately you won't be able to be in the sunlight where people can see you." "Why?" he asked. "Well, when you turned, you and your insides took on crystal-like properties. So when you go into the sun your skin will sparkle. And that opened the gates." He kept asking questions. From why he didn't need to breathe to why he could hear and smell better. While I cooked the deer meat and ate the food, I answered his questions as best as I could, but Julius was a never-ending well of wise. But I couldn't blame him. I would have done the same if I was him. So I answered his questions as best that I could. All the while I learned a few things about Julius. He wasn't a killer. He disliked the idea of taking someone's life. In my opinion, it had to do with what happened to him and his family. And that he didn't want to become what killed them. And that he was a smart kid. That was clear in the way he asked his questions or the way he talked. He reminded me of Carlyle. He didn't want to kill people. And his self-control was good enough for him not to instantly kill a human. Hopefully, I can help him get his urges under control enough to bring him back to Rome with me. I didn't want to ask him about his family just yet. The last thing I'm sure he wanted was to be reminded of that right now. So I decided to wait and ask later. After a few hours, he finally ran out of questions to ask about vampires. And finally, he asked a different question. What now? Well, it's not going to be easy for you to be around people right now with you being a newborn. Your thirst for blood will be a problem. Like right now, even though you just drank all the blood from a fully grown deer, you still feel the need for blood. You seem to be very strong-willed, or you might have a power that helps you with it. I say. So you can come with me and I can help you get it under control. I'm going on a camping trip into the woods for a few months before I return to Rome. And in that time I will help you. I could tell just by looking into his eyes that he was still fighting with himself for the thirst of blood, just not as much as before. Very well, he said. I will come with you. Well, I'm going to get some sleep if you want. I have this, I say, grabbing a scroll from out of my pack and handing it to him. What is this? He asks. It's a play I wrote, I say, lying down. It was a rip-off of the movie Ben-Hur. I wrote for fun. Laying my head down on my pack, I closed my eyes. I wasn't afraid that he would kill me. He had more chances than once to do so and hasn't. And well, I can't die no matter what he did, so I slowly fell asleep. Hoping that I woke up in one piece and not scattered all over the place. I woke early just before the sunrise and looked around. Happy to see that I was still in one piece. And wasn't drained of all my blood. I looked over to Julius. Julius was looking in the direction of the sunrise. Are you nervous? I asked him. Julius looked over at me. A little. There's no need to be, Julius. I knew he was afraid that he would actually sparkle. It was just one more confirmation that he was now a vampire. Slowly the sun rose. The rays of the sun hit his skin and he began to sparkle in the light. Julius looked himself over and sighed in resignation. After a few minutes, he looked back at me and said. That was a fantastic play you wrote, by the way. It was a great blend of betrayal and hardship. But through constant hardships and pain, he was able to get his revenge. I smiled at him and said. So you liked it, did you? Yes, I did. As we talked, I put a metal pan in the still hot coals of the fire. Once it was hot, I laid some pieces of deer meat on the pan and let it sizzle. Julius watched as I cooked. It was silent for a few minutes. The only sound was the sizzling of the food when Julius spoke. And what about you? You seem to know a lot about vampires. Well, it has to do with the fact that I am older than vampires themselves. Julius was clearly shocked at that, but before he could speak I cut him off. I am over 4,000 years old. And when you have lived as long as me, you tend to run into some strange stuff. You are 4,000 years old? But how is that possible? Are you a vampire like me? But that can't be, I can hear your heart. And you said vampire hearts stop working. So how did you do it? The last thing I wanted to do was tell him the truth, so I said the same as I did in my journals. I don't know. I woke up in a forest without my memories. It took me a while to figure out that I was immortal. And well, I just can't seem to die. But, Julius said, trying to wrap his mind around what I just said. Yeah, you must have some pretty good luck. Out of all the people to run into, you run into me. Before Julius could ask more questions, I spoke. I will answer your questions later, but let me pack up and let's get a move on before I answer them. Oh right, Julius said in a sheepish voice. Once I packed up and made sure the fire was completely out, we started our journey into the forest, getting farther and farther away from any humanity. Chapter 17, A Past Told. It took us around 2 days to find the perfect place to set up camp. The whole time I told Julius my story with a few lies here or there. I also told him about the different covens and what was happening in the world of shadows. So in other words, you are running Rome from the shadows? Julius asked. Kind of. Mostly I let the Emperor and the Senate run things. But if I need something done, all I have to do is pay them and they will get it done for me. But what if they won't do something for you? Well, they don't have much of a choice. I have most of the Senate on my pay, willing to do anything for a gold coin. So they would use their sway to get them removed from the Senate. That's a little scary. I've lived in Rome all of my life and I had no idea Rome was this crooked. Well, that's how life is for normal people, Julius. For us, money doesn't really mean that much anymore. I could lose every single gold I own and I wouldn't care. Because I know I can make it back. Maybe in a few hundred years or a few decades. But normal people only live for so long. And they can never make as much as us. But they are willing to do anything for gold to make the years they have comfortable. I said. I see, Julius said while kicking a small stone. It was quiet for a while as Julius thought over my words. It only took around 15 minutes for us to arrive at a small field surrounded by trees. This will do, I said, dropping my pack to the ground. Stretching my back I said. Are you ready to get started? Started? Julius asked. Yet on your training? Oh yes I am. Good. For starters I want you to go and find yourself an animal to hunt. I'm going to be following you and watching. Once you're done I will show you what you might have done wrong. Julius took off into the forest in search of an animal. Julius was like a boulder moving through the forest, stepping on anything that could make noise. Thankfully he used his hearing to pick up the heartbeat of some deer close by and didn't just use his sight. Moving at his full speed, Julius ran right at them. The large male deer didn't even know it died. It was lying down with a few other deers eating close by, then darkness. Julius tackled the deer at full speed, breaking its neck just by the impact of him hitting the deer. And instantly started drinking. The boom of him hitting the deer caused the other deers to scatter. It only took a few seconds for him to drink the large deer dry and finally lift his head. Not bad, kid. You practically decapitated the deer. I said jokingly. Julius looked down with a sheepish look. Sorry, he said, but I could see the small smirk on his face. Once he cleaned up I began to teach him. I started by showing him how to be quieter while moving through the forest instead of making as much noise as possible. Once done with it I started to show him some self-defense. Thankfully Julius managed to pick up on them quickly enough, but he still had a long way to go. That night me and Julius talked. Are there any vampires in Rome? Julius asked. Thankfully most vampires stay out of Rome. Why do they stay out of Rome? Mostly because I won't allow it. Rome is my city and I don't want murderous vampires killing innocent people. How do you keep them out? Julius asked. There's a group called the Vulturi. They are a coven who rule most of the vampires in Rome's territory. They are currently making an army to fight another coven. They know that if any vampires go into Rome I will kill them. And at the moment they need every one of them to fight the other coven. So they keep them away. I'm sure if they beat the other coven they will use their numbers to move into Rome, but by then I will already be out of Rome anyway. I knew that the Vulturi couldn't take down the Romanian coven until the 900s and Rome fell apart around the year 500. And by then I planned to move somewhere else. Where to? Julius asked. Who knows, probably north to Britannia. Or to the land of the Franks. I have a feeling that in years to come they will become very good places to live. Very profitable places as well, I said with a bit of a smile. I looked over the fire at Julius and finally asked. What happened to you when you were attacked? If you don't mind me asking. Julius didn't say anything for a few moments. At first, I didn't think he would respond when he lifted his head and looked at the fire, and spoke. It was me, my father, and my little brother. We were going north to visit some of my father's old military comrades. We had just made camp on the second day when two men came out of nowhere. At first, we thought they were travelers who came to camp as well. They didn't even say a word when they attacked us. Julius' voice began to tremble at the memory. One of them went for my father, then the other went for my brother. I managed to get my father's old sword, but I knew it was too late. I went for the one holding my brother and swung the sword, hitting it on the neck, but it didn't do anything. Not even a scratch. I tried again, but the vampire kicked me. It felt like every bone in my chest was broken. And while I was lying on the ground he walked over to me covered in my brother's blood and looked down at me and smiled. Then everything went black. I woke up in the dark uninjured. My father and brother were dead and I was different. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. So I buried them and then started walking along the road in search of help. After a little while a pain started to grow in my throat, but I pushed on. When I came to the village, I could hear their heartbeats. And that's when I knew what I had become. The monster I now was. I couldn't bring myself to become like them. The ones who killed the only family I had and loved. So I started leaving when I saw your fire. And well, you know the rest. Julius said, lowering his head again. I didn't say anything for a few minutes, absorbing what he just said. I could feel the sadness and pain in his words and the look in his eyes. But I could also see the rage and fire that he had been pushing down. Leaning forward I asked Julius. Do you remember what they look like? Looking up at me Julius said. It's impossible for me not to. I smirked at that. Then what do you say about getting some revenge for your family? Chapter 18, Progress. I trained Julius for the next 3 months. He trained like a madman possessed. The fire of revenge fueled him onwards. During the day I would teach him the basics of fighting hand to hand. Different holds, kicks, or punches. He absorbed it all. And would spend days on end practicing. Only stopping to hunt. All the while I also taught him how to control his new ability. How to touch anything with a feathery touch. Or to just walk instead of zooming all over the place. After around a month and a half, Julius's eyes began to change. From crimson red they slowly began to change to a light yellowish gold. Currently, I and Julius are sparring. We were in a clearing, with the rays of the sun sparkling off of Julius's face and arms, as we blurred, trading blows with each other. Julius sent a kick rocketing for my head. Ducking under the kick, I move in close and try to unbalance him by giving him a shove. Unfortunately, it's practically impossible to do so to a vampire. So instead of falling, Julius just takes a step backward. Before he can attack again I push my quick advantage. Making sure to get in as close as possible, I send a punch to Julius's stomach. Forcing him to take a few more steps back. Not relenting, I move with Julius. Taking a step forward for every step he takes backward. Instead of going for another punch I go for a fight-ending move. Waiting for Julius to try and push me back, or make some distance. And like planned Julius uses his speed to try and outmaneuver me. Trying to get away from me, Julius blurs to the side in a flash. Leaving his side wide open for a millisecond. Blurring to his side I drive my elbow into his ribs. With a loud crack, my elbow made contact. Shooting sideways from the blow, Julius flies through the air, unable to comprehend what just happened. Before Julius could land, I blur in front of where Julius was flying towards. Grabbing him by the neck midair, I stop him dead and lift him up. Then with only half my strength, I slam him down to earth. The boom from his impact could be heard for over a mile in all directions of the fight. Of course, if I had put all of my strength into it, Julius wouldn't be anything but broken pieces. Lowering my speed and strength to match Julius to train, and not kill him by accident. It was a bit of a surprise to me. Seeing that I had actually gotten stronger. It had been a few hundred years since I had really fought. Vampire, or human. Living in Rome I never needed to. Except when Rome was raided. But that was just regular humans and I didn't need to try. But since I started to train Julius, I noticed that I had gotten a lot stranger and faster. It only took me accidentally punching Julius over 100 feet and through a large tree and nearly killing him to figure it out. Since then, I lowered my abilities just for his safety. Looking down at Julius I couldn't help but chuckle. I had slammed him hard enough to make a decent-sized crater in the ground. I could also see the small cracks on Julius. The small hairline cracks slowly healed as I waited for Julius to get up. After a few moments, Julius finally moved. Turning over onto his back he looked up at me. Ouch! Was all he could manage. Well, you're getting better. Last time you only lasted 15 seconds. Oh really? And how long did I make it this time? Julius asked as he slowly sat up, making a few pops, and cracking noises as he did so. 23 seconds, I said with a chuckle. Oh. Well, then that sounds like something to celebrate. Standing to his feet Julius dusted off the dirt, grass, and small rocks from him and then looked at me. Want to go again? I guess you hit the ground a lot harder than I thought, I said, looking him up and down. Okay. One more, then that's all for today. I said turning my back on him. Once we were 50 feet apart I turned back to Julius. This time go all out. Don't hold back. Let out all your anger on me. Are you sure? You're always telling me to never go all out or lose control. True I have. But if you keep pushing yourself like this, and holding in your anger, then you are just going to end up letting it out during a real fight. And that could get you killed. So come on and let it out. Taking in a few deep breaths to prepare myself I wait for him to make his move. And in a split second, I start my mental music to pump myself up for the fight. And the perfect song for it started to play in my head. Adelita's Way Invincible. As the intro begins I can see a change come over Julius's face. It was like a switch was flipped in his head, unleashing the hell inside that he held onto to fuel his hatred. In a blink, Julius was in front of me, swiping his hand at my head. I leaned backward, his hand missing me by a hair's breadth. Before I could go on the attack, Julius was already sending another attack at me. Sending a punch to my abdomen, Julius managed to connect with me, making me take a few steps back. Using the gap, I lift my leg and kick Julius, sending him a few feet backwards, and me some breathing room. Using his hands, Julius stabbed them into the earth, stopping his motion. In a crouched position, gave Julius the perfect opportunity to launch himself at me, rocketing right for me. Julius went for a torso grab. With arms outstretched, he got closer and closer. Without thinking, I jump. Just in time too, because Julius's blurred form shoots past where I was just standing. Landing on my feet, I turned to face Julian head on. Once again he was on me in no time. He was like a wild animal. No thought to his movements, just pure instincts and rage. Fist after fist, slash after slash. Julius pushed his attack. It actually amazed me at his speed and strength that he was showing, making me kick up my abilities just to stay on his level. My guess is the rage was boosting his abilities, making him stronger and faster off of pure rage. I continued to block or dodge his constant onslaught of blows. Julius went for a swipe to my head, and instead of dodging or blocking his attack, I lift my hand and catch his wrist. This gave me the opportunity to do a quick twirl around him. Still holding his arm, I lifted up, putting pressure on his shoulder blade. Vampire or not, the anatomy still stays the same. Instantly Julius bent over in pain. "All right, calm down, Julius," I say, waiting for him to calm down. But instead of calming down, he seemed to get angrier, doing something I didn't expect. Julius went completely limp. The unexpected weight made me tighten my muscles, expecting his weight. But instead, it gave Julius a split second to get free from my arms. He sends his free elbow into my ribs, which causes me to loosen my grip enough for him to get free. Swirling around, Julius kicks me, sending me flying backwards. Thankfully I was able to orient myself and jump off a tree, shooting right back at Julius. But before I could reach him, something really crazy happened. Chapter 19, Power. As I flew through the air toward Julius, I could see the earth around him start to tremble. Small rocks and pebbles start to float into the air, and his gold eyes took on a lighter gold color. Before I could get halfway towards him, rocks began to shoot towards me. Thinking fast, I use my weight to twist my body in an attempt to not get hit. Unfortunately, a small rock hit my shoulder. It was like getting shot. The small rock shot straight through my flesh and bone, shattering my bone as if it were going through paper. The pain was instant and intense. But as soon as the pain hit me, it was gone just as fast. My flesh and bones healing almost instantly. Hitting the ground, I landed on my feet and prepared for what was to come next. Looking at Julius, I could see small rocks and pieces of wood swirling around him again. Like a small tornado, the rocks swirled around him, more rocks and pieces of trees adding to it every second. And with a wave of his hand, it all shot towards me. It was like a wall of death shooting right at me. I only had milliseconds to react. There was no way I would come out unscathed or get out of the way. My best choice was to take a hit and get to him before he started picking up more things to throw at me. So putting my arms in front of my face and head, in the hope that I don't take a hit to the head and need to regrow my brains. I wasn't sure if I would retain my memories if that happened. But better safe than sorry. And began running full speed at the wall of death. It hit me like a train. I could feel the stones shoot right through me. I was hit in the chest, breaking my ribs and going through my left lung. 4 hit my arms. Once in the right forearm, the other 3 in the left, one took 2 of my fingers, and the other 2 shot through my arms and through my shoulder. Then 3 of them went through my legs, twice on the right and once on my left. On my left, they were just flesh wounds. But on my right, it hit the bone, breaking it in 2, causing me to stumble. Thankfully by my next step, the bone was healed enough for me to continue running at Julius. I was now only feet away from him when he lifted his hand again. But this time, instead of him lifting more rocks, he used his new power on me. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was like I hit a stone wall at full force, and I couldn't move. Julius was in front of me, his hand still outstretched, palm open. Using all of my strength, I pushed hard on the force holding me. Slowly I could feel my bones start to crack from the force of me pushing my arms and legs, trying to overpower him. I could see the strain on his face. And after a few seconds, I could feel whatever was holding me start to fade away. And in a split second, it was gone. As my feet hit the ground, and so did Julius. He fell backward and hit the ground clutching his head. Julius! I say in a panic. Zooming to his side, I kneel next to him. I think you might have overdone it a bit, I say with a chuckle after checking him over. From the look of it, Julius has telekinesis. I thought. This was the first time I had come into contact with a vampire that has this kind of ability. Most vampires only had mental abilities, like mind reading, or can affect others with their mental ability. But never one where their mental strength can affect the physical world. No kidding, he says, still holding his head. After a few minutes, Julius manages to sit up and looks over at me. What was that? Julius asked, still holding his head. Well, it turns out you have a gift, I say sitting down next to him. Some vampires when they are turned awaken gifts, it's said that it's their biggest trait during their human life and that it manifests when turned, I continued, patting him on the shoulder. And what was that I was doing? I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. It was all natural, I was moving things without touching them. Julius asked me as he looked at his hands. It's called telekinesis, it's where you use your mind to move objects with your mind, I say pointing at a small rock in front of us. Try moving that, I say to him. Julius looked at the rock and furrowed his brow. A second later the rock began to lift from the ground, then 2 and 3, more and more of them lifted from the ground and started to float. Incredible, Julius said with a big smile on his face. Julius then started to do tricks with the pebbles. First, all of them lined up, then started to make the shape of a circle, then rotating it. Going faster and faster until it started looking like a perfect solid circle. Then he started to add more rocks until there were close to 100 pebbles. Then they came to a complete stop. Ack, Julius said, clutching his head as the pebbles dropped to the ground like their strings were cut. I guess either your powers have a limit or you just need some practice using it to strengthen your abilities, I said while standing to my feet. I think I just need to practice, Julius said. Well, then I think we should get to practicing, I said walking towards our camp. Every day we waste here the farther your family's killers get, and the more people they will kill, so let's kick up your training, I said not turning around. Chapter 20, A Hunt. For the next 3 months, Julius trained his new abilities. And I must say holy, fucking, shit. Julius's power stopped growing after a month of him awakening it. But by then, he could already unroot 100-foot trees with his damn mind. And shoot rocks or pebbles faster than bullets. If he wanted to, he could pick me up and throw me around with his mind. But he quickly learned that was a bad idea. I started carrying pebbles with me, and he found out that I throw accurately when I need to. I found out that his power has a feeling to it, it's very subtle and almost impossible to feel unless you're around it all the time when he uses it. And if he wants to use it on me I can feel it creep towards me, and that's when the pebbles come in. It only took him having to reattach one of his ears for him to get the memo. I'm not a rag doll to be thrown around. And finally, the day has come when we can leave the forest and go after Julius's family's killers. Sliding my pack over my shoulder I look over at Julius, who just slung his pack. Are you ready to go? I asked him. Looking around to make sure he didn't leave anything he said good to go. And off we went. I wasn't worried about bringing him into a village or town. While training his martial skills I also trained his self-control. I would cut my hand open and smear it around our camp so he would always have the smell of fresh blood around him all the time. I know what you're thinking, gross, but hey, it works so. Raspberry noise, deal with it. With his already incredible self-control, all that was needed was more training with the direct smell of human blood instead of smelling it through skin and flesh. So training under stronger smell training, I guess. What has my life become, has become a recurring thought in my head. I mean, one day a nerd and now a few thousand years later in what used to be a fictional world to me, I'm now a master Shifa for a vampire kid with the ability to throw me around with his mind. Need I say more? But back to the story. Leaving our camp behind, we begin our journey. But first, we make a stop. We now stood in front of 2 makeshift graves. The 2 makeshift graves only now starting to grow grass, making them easier to find. We stood silently at the foot of the graves in respect for the dead. After a few minutes, Julius finally turned to me. I think it's time I get my revenge, he says and walks past me. And off we went. It took us another few days to reach a village. It only had a small population, but it did have a few traders, so I could get some supplies. Sure, fresh meat is good and all, but it's so bland. I only packed enough spices for a few months and not the almost year it took for Julius to be ready. I also had to get Julius some clothes. His clothes wore out after a few months of training, and he was now using my clothes to cover any showing skin but his eyes. I really need to find something out about that. Like some sort of paint or something. I'm sure with my pull in Rome I could make it the next sensation, but if not, no big deal. We still had the royal era where nobles or the rich literally painted thick paint onto themselves for what they thought was beauty. Entering the village, I bought the needed supplies and extra spices, along with a white cloak for Julius with a hood to cover his head. While we were there, we asked around for any information about the two vampires. Finding an old man sitting in front of his small rundown home, we asked him. I think I might have seen two strange men passing through quite a while ago, he said in a raspy voice. And what direction did they leave in? I asked excitedly, as we already got a lead. The old man scratched his almost bald head and said. That was a long time ago, I'm not too sure I remember, he said. This old man is killing me, I thought while pinching the bridge of my nose. I knew exactly what he wanted. This old fogey wanted money for information. I know I have a lot of money and all, but what you would call a penny pincher. What can I say? Old habits are hard to kill, even though it's from my life before I came here, when I was one missed day of paying rent away from living in a box. So with a defeated sigh, I grabbed a silver from my pouch, held it up, and said. What about now? And with no shame the old man grabbed the coin from my hand and pointed south. They went that way a few months ago. It's hard to not remember them. They almost had all the women chasing after them with their godly looks, he said while biting into the coin. Well, thanks for the information, I said with a fake smile, and began to walk away with Julius while mumbling under my breath. Leaving the town, me and Julius headed south. All the way I told stories to Julius of my past and adventures. And he would ask questions. Every now and then we would pass through villages and ask if people had seen our vampires. And of course, they had. The biggest thing to keep people from boredom was gossip. And when two men that look like demigods or wore strange clothing pass through your village, that's some hot gossip. So it was easy to follow their track. From what we could tell, these two vampires were taking their time. And we were slowly catching up with them. And it didn't take a genius to figure out where they were heading. Rome. So that gave me another reason to kill them. And before they got to Rome. Because these two are clearly killers and didn't care about human life. Every now and then, we would come across dead bodies of travelers in resting locations along the roads. Making me hate them all the more. The last thing I want is for them to get to Rome and start a coven of newborns. That thought made me turn on the afterburners. Instead of walking, me and Julius ran at full speed so we could catch up with them quickly. And within another month we had finally found them. After talking to someone in the village, we found out that they had just left the village no less than 30 minutes ago. Me and Julius look at each other and then take off. Thankfully we didn't zoom out of the village and instead waited until we were out of sight before taking off, hot on their heels. Chapter 21, The Wolves Become the Sheep. It only took minutes of us running at full speed to catch up to them. Both of them were in head-to-toe black cloaks with the head cover up to help keep their skin from sparkling. When we were a few hundred feet, they both turned to look at us. The shock was clear to see on their faces. Me and Julius come to an abrupt stop and have a stare-off. One of them slowly lowers his cloak's hood and looks at us. All the while staring at Julius. You, the taller one with long brown hair said with clear disgust in his voice. You are supposed to be dead. Clearly I'm not, Julius said in a condescending voice. This time the shorter one spoke, but he had yet to remove his hood. It seems he held on to life long enough for him to change. Turning his head to Julius he said in his deep voice, revealing only an evil smile from under his cloak. Come to get revenge, have you? He said with a chuckle in his voice. I've come for more than that, Julius says, his voice cold as ice and devoid of any feeling. This was a side of him I had yet to see. This was the really pissed off Julius. And what, you and your friend here thought you could get your revenge? The tall skinny vampire said slowly, taking off his cloak. Ptaha, I laughed at him. I won't do anything, I say, walking to the side of the road to lean on a tree. There's no need for me to help, Julius here can take on both of you all on his own. Both of them only give me a quick glance before looking back to Julius's cold expressionless face. The shorter one smiled again and said, "It's your life you're throwing away," he said, and took off his cloak, revealing a very blocky ordinary face. With dark brown hair, almost black hair, and his deep crimson eyes. The evil smile never leaves his face all the while. "Would you like to know something?" he says, tossing his cloak to the side. "Your little brother, he had some of the sweetest blood I have ever had. It was like the nectar of the gods as it touched my tongue, the sweet savory taste makes me salivate at just the thought," he said, and smacked his lips to drive the point home. Then the other vampire also with an evil grin spoke. "Then there was your father, he had a very unique taste, oh how should I put it, a very gamey taste, yes, like the taste of those who have lived a full life with many more years to go but was destined to die at our hands," he said with a sadistic chuckle. These two were clearly unhinged and had a few screws loose. "And the best part," said the shorter one, "was when I looked into your eyes, that fear in them I can see it now, yes, I can, the sadness and hatred I can see it, the fear," he said, sounding more insane the more he spoke. And his smile grew wider and wider, showing off his slightly longer canines. "Ah, that feeling," he said, his hand slowly going down to his crotch. "Ah, he's one of those guys I thought, having to put a hand over my mouth to stop myself from puking or killing him myself. If we weren't so hungry, me and my friend here would have had more fun with you and your brother and father before killing you. I would have loved to see that fear in your brother's eyes, oh I'm sure it would have been blissful," the shorter vampire said, "and I was close to killing them myself, but before they could continue to talk, Julius made his move." The shorter vampire, who seemed to be the one in charge, was about to speak again, now with his hand fully touching his crotch when the ground seemed to shake. Both vampires froze, their smiles slowly dropping from their faces, at the sight of rocks, pebbles, and anything on the ground starting to float off the ground. Then one of his hands shot up in their direction, licking them in place. The shock was clear on their faces, their eyes as wide as saucers. "You're going to suffer a death that will make the both of you beg for me to end your lives before I'm done with you," Julius said in his cold voice. "And when you beg, that's when the real torture starts." Moving his hand down, the two vampires went to their knees, still wide-eyed. Then the show began. Pebbles began to shoot the two vampires who were now on their knees. But he didn't just shoot them with the pebbles, oh no, what he did was way worse. He only grazed them, talking them apart piece by small piece, slowly taking them apart. Each pebble taking small pieces of them, causing them to scream in agony. And for hours he continued. And I let him. Because I knew, if I was him I would have done much worse. I would have taken off their arms and legs and cooked them over a volcano for a few hundred years. The first one to break was the tall guy. "Just kill me already, I can't take this anymore," he bellowed. And I saw the smile spread over Julius's face. "Sure," he said. Then with both hands aimed at the tall vampire, Julius slowly moved his hands inward, slowly crushing him. After a minute the vampire started to scream bloody murder, like his flesh was being cut off of his bones. Then the creaking sounds started. Crack after crack, then the sound of him slowly crumbling under Julius's hate and anger that he buried deep down inside him, waiting for just this moment to be used as the fuel to kill his and his family's killers. Crack, then a loud crack, then crumble sounded out as the tall vampire was turned to all but crystal dust, all the while his shorter friend watched on in horror. The gross part is I could see that he was hard the whole time. Disgusting, I thought, as I could only imagine how sick this man was. "Your turn," Julius said, looking back at the shorter vampire. "Wait," was all he managed to say before he was lifted into the air. Then in a flash, all of his limbs except for his head were torn from his body. "Ah!" the shorter vampire screamed. "Oh, I would save that," said Julius. "Like I said earlier, we're just getting started. I was starting to wonder if I should stop him, but I realized that in his current state, he would more than likely try to kill me if I tried to interfere with this. The best I could do was hope that him doing this won't affect his personality." I watched as Julius aligned the limbs back into place on the shorter vampire's body, then they started making circling motions. "He's going to ground him into dust using his own limbs to do so," I thought as I watched on. Not gonna lie, I was impressed. I would have never thought to do that. But I had to put an end to this. "Julius, that's enough, it's time to end this," I said, making sure to keep a good distance between us. Chapter 22, Starting a New Life. Julius looked over at me, and I could see the emotions in his eyes. It was a mixture of rage, sadness, and loneliness. Why should I? They are monsters, and like you said, monsters don't deserve to live, after all the death they leave behind them. How many bodies did we pass on the way here, how many have they killed? This is the least of what they deserve. Julius all but yelled. They are monsters, Julius, but what you are doing will also make you a monster. You already tortured them, it's time to end this and get it behind you. There is something I have learned over the years, and that's that no matter what you do, the feeling of loss or rage you are feeling for your family will always be there. Even after you grind him to dust, it will be there, and you will still feel the exact same as before. I say, slowly walking up to him. Even with the dampeners on my sadness emotions, I could still feel the loss of those I've known over the years, just not fully, but I still could all the same. But that doesn't mean it won't fade to just a memory, but if you continue this, and fall into that pit of rage inside you, there is no turning back, you will live forever, Julius, and if you fall into that pit, you will live for eternity in hate and rage, and you might as well be living in hell, I say, putting a hand on his shoulder. I could see the emotions in his eyes fighting with each other for superiority. But after a few moments, one came out victorious, and that was sadness. Julius's lip began to quiver, and slowly he lowered his head and began to cry. It's hard to think of him as just a kid. Julius is smart and well-spoken for his age, but underneath that is still just a 16-year-old kid who misses his family. I wrap him in an embrace and let him cry. On a road in the forest, with a limbless vampire floating in the air screaming while he gets turned into glitter dust. After a few moments, Julius managed to regain himself and stand up straight again. Let's put an end to this, I say, patting his back. Stepping away from him, I let him finish what he started. Instead of grinding him to dust, he did something simpler. Slowly lowering him to the ground, Julius looked the smaller vampire in his eyes and said, I hate you with every part of myself, but I won't fall, I won't become you. The shorter vampire looked at Julius with hatred and opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Julius lifted both of his hands, and with a crack, the shorter vampire's head was twisted from his shoulders. The vampire's head slowly levitated in front of Julius, and he stared into the dead vampire's crimson-red eyes for a long moment, then it dropped to the ground like a brick. Well then, I think it's now time to head to Rome, I say, stepping up beside Julius. Looking over at me, Julius spoke. Right, Rome, I could still hear the sadness in his voice. Putting a hand on his shoulder, I spoke. You have gotten your revenge, now it's time to take a step forward down our infinite road of life. I know I might sound harsh, but your family is gone, Julius, and it's time to move on. In a small voice, Julius spoke, now looking down at the remains of the vampires. I know, it's just that ever since I was turned into a vampire and met you, I have pushed down all of these emotions, and used hate and rage to push myself forward, while I locked my sadness and sorrow behind a locked door, all to push myself to get my revenge, but now that I've gotten it, all of it is coming to the surface, and I don't know what to do with it. He said, his head still lowered. Patting him on the back, I say. It will fade, Julius, just give it time, and let it all out. We live too long to hold in our emotions, because the more and longer we push it down, the harder it will hit us when it comes back up. Julius nods at my words but doesn't look up. Now let's get rid of these two sickos, I say, kicking the head in front of us. Then with a quick flick of my foot, I started to bounce the head on my sandaled foot. Then I flicked it up again and started to bounce his head on my knees. Think fast, I say to Julius as I kick the head to him. With a startled look, Julius started to copy what I did to the head. I couldn't stop the laughter that bubbled up and out of my mouth. Then Julius started to laugh as he continued to play soccer with the vampire's head. How morbid have we become, where playing hacky sack with a head became a way to release tension? I thought as Julius tossed the head in my direction. After a few more moments of fun, we got to work, moving the bodies into a pile, including the head and the dust from the vampire that was crushed. After starting a small fire, I give Julius a stick with a small flame at the tip and say, To starting anew. To starting anew, he copied, then lowered the small flame to the cloak of one of the vampires. In a matter of seconds, the vampires were engulfed in flames. After watching for a few moments, we grabbed our packs and started down the road. Straight for Rome. Chapter 23, Home at Last. It took a little more than 2 weeks to get to the outskirts of Rome, where my villa was located. The reason why it was outside of Rome was because I built it on my farmland. It was a 2-story villa with large marble pillars around the villa. There are 23 rooms and an indoor bathhouse, along with areas just for large parties that I have never used or will, and also with a courtyard in the middle. And the inside was the pure meaning of wealth, with gold everywhere you looked. It was in the middle of my lands that were currently being farmed. As we walked down the long road, we watched the hundreds of free slaves now free working the wheat fields. And you own all of this? Julius asked as his head went left and right looking around, his hood covering his head and with the sun to our backs kept him from sparkling. Yup, I said with a small smile on my face. And what do you do with all of this land? Julius asked, now looking at me. Well, I do a lot with it. Most of the land is for farming wheat and other crops, but we also have vineyards on the east side of my lands, but what brings in the most money is the horses that my farm breeds, I said while looking around. My farm is the official horse breeder of the Roman Empire, so in other words we are the only ones who breed all of the horses for the cavalry, and for officers of the legions. But aren't you also the one who provides all of the weapons and armor for the legions as well? Julius asks with a bewildered look. That I am, I said, unable to hide the wide smile on my face. How much gold do you have? He asked with a raised eyebrow. I lost count after 1 billion gold, and since it's been almost a year since I checked, who knows, I could be broke or have almost half of Rome's money. The only problem is I can't spend it fast enough, and I'm afraid that if the emperor keeps giving me more money for weapons of war, Rome will run out of money and it could end in catastrophe, and I can't just say no to him or he will just take it for himself. The only thing keeping him from doing so are the politicians that I am paying, I said with a furrowed brow. That is a problem. Maybe I should take a look. I have always been good with numbers and I was in charge of my father's books, so I might be able to help, Julius said. It can't hurt, I suppose, I said. By now my villa could be seen even though we were almost a whole mile from it. The sun was shining off the bright white marble. Is that your home? Julius asked, slack-jawed at the sight of it. That it is. I've lived here for almost 100 years or so, I said looking at it with nostalgia. As we walked, Julius asked his questions like normal and I answered him like normal. It took another 15 minutes or so to finally arrive at the entrance of my villa. In front of the main door stood all of my employees or staff who worked for me. They were my cooks or cleaners as well as some of my head farmers and horse breeders. They were all lined up and waiting for me. In the middle of them was the man I left in charge. His name was Alista. Alista is a smart man who has worked for me since he was in his early 20s and was just kicked out of his father's estate all because he didn't believe that Alista was his son. In the end, his father, who was a sea merchant, ran out of business when I took over all of the sea trade in Rome. He was a very smart man, good with numbers as well as people, making him the perfect person to do business for me. In other words, he was the face of all of my operations. Everyone believed he was the one who owned all of it as well, but a certain few knew otherwise, that he was just working for someone else. But now he was starting to get on in years and unfortunately, his wife couldn't have kids, so it was just him and her. I planned to buy them a nice villa by the sea and let them have a peaceful retirement. He also knew my secret, about me being immortal. He couldn't tell the difference between that and me being a god, making him very loyal to me, no matter what I say to him. As we got closer to the entrance, all of them did a deep bow in respect to me and in unison said, "Welcome back. It's good to see all of you again, and all in good health," I said with a wide smile. Stepping forward, Alista and I shook hands. "How is everything going, Alista?" I asked him. "Everything is going well, sir." After a few more minutes of talking to my staff, me and Julius walked inside. "Incredible," Julius said as he saw the inside of my home, and I couldn't blame him. It truly is a work of art, with works of art on the walls or status scattered along the halls. "We should rest for the day, we can check the books tomorrow," I said to Julius as I dropped my pack on the ground. "If you get hungry, there are some woods a mile to the north with a good amount of wildlife for you to hunt. I would just recommend you go at night so nobody sees you," I said. "Now let me show you to your new room," I said, gesturing down the hall. His new room was the second biggest besides my own room on the second floor. It had a high ceiling with a large balcony with a good view, and a large bed with fancy drapes around it to keep out the light. "Now I think I'm going to fall into a deep sleep now. I will see you early tomorrow," I said, then left his room. I didn't even bother to change into any new clothes or wash myself. I simply undressed and then fell onto my bed naked. It's surprising how much I missed the luxurious lifestyle that I now lived. After thousands of years of living under the sky, it only took a few hundred years for me to become addicted to this. Of course, I could have lived like this long ago by becoming a king or a ruler, but that just seemed like too much of a hassle. I got to travel to every corner of the world that I currently could, but if I became a king or something, I would never be able to leave. I would become caged into the role of ruler, and I would rather be free to do what I want rather than that. I thought as I slowly drifted off to sleep. Chapter 24, Expanding to New Lands. Year 186 AD. Years in World 4186. After that day things seemed to take off like a rocket and I forgot to buckle up. Julius and Alista became best of friends as Alista showed him the books with records of my money and businesses. And the two of them brainstormed a way to spread out my money. Oh, and what is that, you ask? Well, let me tell you. It was to start building a chariot arena. And not just some circular area where they go in a circle on a quarter-mile track. It was a 5-mile long track with seats going all the way around it. With seats for hundreds of thousands of people, with suites for the emperor or nobles at the very top. With massive pieces of velarium on long poles for shade. We paid the workers an above-average amount for their work. I mean, it's not like we won't make it back when those workers come back and pay for entrance. But the entrance fee might as well be free, with how low it was. It took almost 20 years to make the arena. At this point, Alista had retired to the villa I bought for him and his wife with servants for their every need. So now Julius was in charge of my finances and loved it. He was always doing different charities for the poor and building new homes for the poor. And he was always using my money for one thing or another, making sure that it got around. All the while I wasn't sitting in the corner twiddling my thumbs. I was looking to expand out because when Rome falls and the Volturi takes over, I will be able to move somewhere I have already set up. Rome collapsed in the year 476 AD, so that gives me a good 300 years to get a plan in place. And I think I know just the place. England, or what will become England. All because in later years England will be a superpower with its fingers in every empire's pie. And where else do you put all of your gold if not in a place that was only invaded by the Normans in 1066 or small amounts of Viking invasions? Currently, England is under the rule of the Romans. So leaving Julius in charge, I hitched a ride on one of my ships to England with a metric shit ton of gold to help with my idea. Once there I started building my small underground empire. I plan to become an important part of what will become England. And how do you do that? Well, let me tell you. I started by opening a bank. I ended up naming my banks Gringotts because just like the goblins in Harry Potter, my vaults were underground and I had most of the gold in my vaults. But unlike in Rome, I made this one twice the size of the one in Rome, because I was planning for the long term. And with the Romans ruling England, there were plenty of officials and military officers who knew of the vaults in Rome and were more than happy to use my vaults. What I did with this one was loans. With the gold in the vaults, I would lend out their gold to someone and they would have to pay it back at a 3% interest rate. 2% to the person whose gold we used and 1% back to the bank. We did monthly payments, or you could pay it all in full. But you always had to put something up as collateral if you couldn't pay back what you took, like land or your home, sheep, horses, cattle, whatever you took out. You had to have something worth as much as you took out. And let me tell you, was it popular with the people whose gold was used and gained money just by keeping their gold in our vaults, although it wasn't much because they were paying us to keep their gold safe? We also had 100% insurance on your money. Like if we were to be overrun and some king ran off with your gold, we would give you back what was taken, no strings attached. Back then your gold was always at risk of being taken, so that was also very important. Something interesting is that I had to employ a literal army of people to work for me. For starters, nobody knew how to count over 10, so I ended up bringing people from Rome to teach my new employees math, so how to count, read, and write. Those who excelled at it were put in places of management, with their own underlings to work for them. I had a department just for keeping the papers in order and up to date, as well as one for the loans, to make sure the payments were being paid on time. I also had a group of soldiers or ex-soldiers as my collectors who would go and threaten those who didn't want to pay what they owed. As well as a hidden group that I placed in each department that would tell me if people were stealing, in other words, my own narcs or snitches. Then I had the really bad guys, and I mean the worst of the worst, all in their own little department. And who are those, you might ask? Well, let me tell you. The auditors. These were the guys that I paid the big bucks just to make sure they didn't go crooked on me. Even though I had my own narc in the group, it's less of a hassle to deal with if I just pay them more and keep them honest and happy. The auditors were the really smart guys, and the hardest to find to fill an auditor position. They were like finding a needle in a haystack. Their job was to make sure everything was run perfectly, and if they found anything wrong, God have mercy on that person's soul. Of course, this was still a small operation, not even a quarter of what was in the vaults in Rome, but that was just for now. After I was done in England, I decided, like a great man once said, well, I got this far, might as well keep going. So I did. Putting my most trustworthy employee in charge, I got on one of my ships and started moving. After making a quick stop in Rome to see how Julius was doing, I went to Egypt and did the same thing in the city of Alexandria. And let me tell you, it's nice to have friends in high places in Rome. Anywhere Rome ruled, I could do whatever I wanted. After another few years there, I went to India and then the Middle East, building my banks. I hadn't gone to China yet, but that was just a matter of time. I just didn't want to overdo it. I was going to let the banks establish themselves and everything get on track, then maybe I would expand. I was making England the headquarters for all of this as well. All banks would make copies of their records and using my ships send them to England where they would be stored. So if there was a fire or something, they can request the document, where we could copy it and then send it to them. Causing me to make another department just for that. By this point, it was the year 227 and I was satisfied with what I had done. My banks were now known all over the known world. Chapter 25, Moving, and a Chair for the Gods. Year 300. Years in World 4300. The time has finally come for us to move to England. It took some convincing to get Julius to come with me to England, but with all of the new banks and England being the new headquarters for the banks, we decided it was best to be there. Originally I was going to stay in Rome until it fell, but why not get a head start in England and be there from the start? Leaving someone in charge of the Rome branch, we got on a boat and headed to England. Over the years that I've been there, I had a home built for me. It was much simpler than the villa that I had in Rome. It was just a 3-room stone building, but I liked it. It had everything I needed, a bed, a shitter, and a bath area. So I was set. But it's what's under my home that's important. Under my home, I have my library where I put all of my scrolls and journals. And things that I've collected over the years I spent traveling. So when Julius came to live with me, I had more than enough room. Stepping off the large boat and onto the dock, I turned to look at Julius as he grabs his pack and slings it over his shoulder. "Come on, old man, we don't have all day," I say to him, unable to hide the smile on my face. "That stopped being funny 100 years ago," he says to me in a dry tone, but I could see him trying not to smile. "And you're thousands of years older than me, you should be dust," Julius said from behind me, and I couldn't help but chuckle at that. That's true, but I still look good. Over the years I would visit Julius every few months or whenever I passed by. And slowly we began to take on a brotherly connection. If he had a problem he couldn't solve, I would be there to help. If he needed some advice, I would give it. It was hard on him for a while, watching those he bonded with die. Unlike me, Julius could feel the sadness of every loss, and over time I could see it eat at him. First, he became more of a recluse to those around him and wouldn't leave the villa for years at a time. Then he put more of the work on his second in command and wouldn't try to connect with anyone around him. So I didn't give him much of a choice when I told him to come with me to England. During the long voyage, I spoke to him. I told him ways to help with the loss of people he knows. For starters, we shouldn't mourn the dead, they are dead, and unless there is a terrible accident, they more than likely had a great and full life, so we should celebrate the life that they did live and not the fact that they are gone. And so on. Over time I could see the weight on his shoulders lighten up. Now that we are in England, I lead him to my home. Getting on horses we passed through the streets of Londinium. At the moment it's a far cry to what it will be. At the moment it's practically just a fort city of around 70k people. But I had the patience to wait for it to grow. "And why again did you decide to put the main bank here?" Julius asks, looking around. "Well, I have some high hopes for this place," I say. "And what exactly gave you those hopes?" "It's just a feeling, and I've seen many dynasties come and go, and from what I can see this place has the ability to grow into something great." "Right," Julius said with clear sarcasm in his voice. "Hey, look on the bright side, it's cloudy here almost all the time, so you don't have to cover up." I could see Julius freeze in his saddle as he realized that he had his hood down. Wide-eyed he looked over to me, then up at the cloudy sky. "We wait," Julius said, surprised. "Yup, it's cloudy here almost all the time, giving you more time in the open. Of course, it's not always cloudy, it does have sunny days just like anywhere else." I could see the smile grow on his face as he looked at the cloudy sky. "That's wonderful. Normally in Rome there's only 1 or 2 months a year I can go out during the day, and that's only when it rains," Julius said, still smiling. "Exactly why I thought you would like it here," I said. "It took us a little over an hour to make it to my new home." "This is your home?" Julius asked as he looked at the stone building. "Yes, it is. It has everything needed. As well as an underground level where I keep all of my important things. Getting off our horses, I show Julius the inside of my home as well as the secret entrance to the basement. It's conformable. I guess it's just strange to see you live in something this small. I was expecting something around 50 times bigger and grander than this, he said, looking around. I chuckled at that and explained my reasoning. I have lived in riches for many years, and to be honest, it got boring to live like that. I'm sure in a few hundred years I'll go back to wanting to live the grand life, but for now I'm happy with this, I say, taking a seat on my lazy boy that I made. Pointing a finger at my chair, Julius asked, "What is that?" I looked down at my chair and smiled up at him. "Oh, you mean this fine work of art?" "I wouldn't call it a work of art, but it does look comfortable." "The audacity," I say in a shocked voice. "This chair is the greatest thing made since the pyramids," I say in a joking manner. Standing up, I point to the lazy boy. "Take a seat and you will understand." Walking over, Julius lightly sits down. It was funny to see his face when the chair lightly rocked backward when he sat down, the look of surprise on his face when he felt how comfortable the chair was. "And that's not the best part," I say with a wide smile. "And how can this chair get any better?" he asked with furrowed brows. "Easy, just pull that lever on the side of the chair." Julius looked over the side at the lever in confusion. "What does it do?" he asked, looking back up at me. "Just pull the lever and you will see," I said. Tentatively, Julius reached down and pulled the lever back. As he pulled the lever, the foot of the chair raised up. Julius looked down at what just happened with wide eyes and an open mouth in surprise. "This is a chair for the gods," Julius all but screamed as he relaxed into the chair. "I know that, but there is a problem," I said, walking up next to him. "And that would be?" he asked, eyes closed. "This is my chair," I say with a mischievous grin. Julius's eyes pop open and he looks at me. "There's only one chair?" he asked in fright. "Yes, and you're sitting in it. If you want one I will show you how to make one, but for now you're in my spot, so move it."
Thanks for listening.